C91. Tranquility. As the number of new queen ants gradually increased, the swarm's population grew at an even faster rate. In just over 200 days, the swarm had recovered to its pre-war scale. Bases that had been abandoned during the war were restored and rebuilt. Several armies resumed their expeditions in batches. In addition to the original 4 armies heading east, west, north, and central, a new southern army was also established. It could be said that the swarm was now advancing in all directions, with no natural barriers or external forces capable of halting its progress. Perhaps the war with the Yellow Earth Ant Legion had already touched the ceiling of this region's combat power. In the days that followed, the swarm faced little resistance, encountering no formidable enemies. Ant nests like those of the big-headed ants, which had once seemed imposing, were now nothing more than minor obstacles to the swarm. When confronted with the exploratory armies, they couldn't even stir up a ripple. The swarm's military strategy was now remarkably straightforward. For smaller colonies, like those of the black ants, there wasn't much to say, just directly overwhelm their nests. A single exploratory squad could handle them effortlessly. For larger colonies, such as the red ants, which numbered in the millions, multiple exploratory squads would combine their forces to deal with them. Once gathered, they would openly engage in battle at the entrance of the opposing nest. However, all armies were now equipped with dual-layered long-range firepower units. These units followed the main forces closely, and whenever a squad encountered an enemy numbering in the hundreds of thousands, they would call for firepower support. Without comparable firepower, most engagements were resolved with a single barrage of covering fire, followed by a frontal assault from the vanguard, ensuring swift victories. Even when facing big-headed ants with populations in the millions, a certain degree of respect was warranted. Nevertheless, the outcomes were no different from those against smaller groups, just a few more rounds of firepower and charges to seal the deal. 10 kilometers. 100 kilometers. 1,000 kilometers. As time passed, the swarm's territory expanded continuously. Without any natural predators, the swarm developed at an astonishing pace, growing to an immeasurable size. Luo Wen had long since lost precise control over the swarm. It wasn't because the swarm had betrayed him. They remained loyal to him, and his will still permeated every aspect of the swarm. The problem he faced was the same old issue: communication. The swarm lacked an effective means of communication. When the territory was still small, communication bugs were responsible for relaying messages. Later, as the territory expanded, faster transport bugs were employed to carry communication bugs and transmit messages. Now, however, the transport bug remained the fastest unit, but the territory had grown exponentially. For Luo Wen to send a message to the exploratory armies on the borders, even with transport bugs running day and night, it would take months before the queen ants of the distant armies received the message. Such inefficiency could prove catastrophic if the swarm encountered an evenly matched enemy. Fortunately, the swarm was currently too powerful. Even in Iphiash's homeland, the land of the transcendent wizards, while a single insect might not be their match, even 1 million or 10 million insects might not suffice, the swarm could still demonstrate what it meant to bring despair without end. Luo Wen mused that if that green-haired wizard had succeeded in its rebellion, he might have taken an alternative path. Even if individual combat strength was negligible, the collective power of the swarm had already reached the level of city and national destruction. Of course, these thoughts were merely Luo Wen's idle musings. At present, he couldn't even think of ways to court death. Everywhere he looked, it was all swarm territory, devoid of threats. He had already experienced free falling from great heights back when he was the size of a fingernail, and now, he had even learned to dive. With the constant integration of new genes, things capable of threatening him had dwindled to the point of non-existence. Perhaps this was the terror of Iphiash. As the swarm's territory extended over the years, environmental differences in various regions occasionally birthed unique ant species and bugs. Whenever they appeared, they added ripples to Luo Wen's otherwise tranquil life, one of his few remaining sources of excitement. Most of these bugs, however, offered redundant traits, although a few managed to surprise him. For instance, a species of red and black ants possessed exceptionally developed mandibular glands that ran from their heads to their abdomens. When encountering powerful enemies, they would bite down on their foes, contract their muscles, and self-destruct. The toxic fluid in their glands would splatter everywhere, causing significant area damage with its potent mix of poisonous substances. Another species exhibited a similar ability. They had 2 crystalline structures between their thorax and abdomen. When they needed to self-destruct, These crystals would react with secretions from their salivary glands, producing a highly toxic substance. Their explosions were directional, ensuring a one-for-one trade at the very least. This was a talent Luo Wen had once feared might awaken within him, yet to his amazement, certain bugs actually possessed such capabilities. Incorporating their genes created a new type of unit for the swarm, albeit in limited numbers due to their lack of practical use. Another interesting ant species lived in trees, carving tunnels into the trunks to build their nests. The entrance was small, allowing only one ant through at a time. With limited territory confined to their trees, their access to resources was minimal, which naturally limited their population. When faced with invaders, they couldn't engage in head-on confrontations like other species. Instead, they devised a unique defensive strategy. Some of these ants developed mutations that gave them rounded or rectangular chitinous shields on their heads. When intruders approached, these mutants would block the nest entrance with their heads. Invaders often found it difficult to deal with these sturdy shields and would leave after a period of stalemate. This ability was intriguing but held little value for the swarm, which no longer needed to defend against enemies. Luo Wen only created a few as decorations. There was also a type of ant soldier whose head sprouted a cannon-like structure capable of spraying a resin-like substance with immense adhesive properties. Though non-toxic and lacking direct lethality, it was an excellent control mechanism. Luo Wen enhanced their genes with several types of toxins, creating a hybrid artillery bug capable of both controlling and killing. With their elongated barrels, their shots were highly focused, avoiding dispersion. After Luo Wen's improvements, their range extended to 20 to 30 meters, with precise targeting at 15 meters, making them perfect for sniping high-value targets. Now, numerous such artillery bugs served in the border armies. Additionally, Luo Wen absorbed other fascinating traits into the gene pool whenever they proved useful. C92. Underwater breathing. Time passed unnoticed, and Luo Wen had long since stopped bothering to calculate its passage. The prolonged peace in the swarm's territory meant that many worker ants had never set foot on a battlefield since hatching. This peaceful existence even allowed them the rare opportunity to die of old age. As batches of worker ants perished, new ones were seamlessly added, ensuring the swarm's operations were unaffected. The Northern Army had been advancing along a river, undergoing various course changes but generally maintaining its direction. Recently, a message came from the Queen Ant accompanying the army. The forces had encountered an exceptionally wide river that blocked their path. While the aquatic units accompanying the army explored the river, they suffered heavy losses. Yet, it seemed they hadn't encountered any enemies. The report was contradictory and unclear, prompting Luo Wen to investigate personally. As he traveled farther north, the temperature dropped noticeably. However, due to the planet's significant day-night temperature differences, even desert cliffs could freeze at night. The local plants and insects had developed strong cold resistance, and the swarm's genetic adaptations made it impervious to such conditions. The flora gradually shifted from broad-leafed plants to conifers as the temperature continued to decline. Along the way, Luo Wen even experienced a sudden snowstorm. Though it lasted only half an hour before clearing, the ground accumulated nearly 20 centimeters of snow in that short time. For Luo Wen, with his long legs, the snow posed no obstacle. However, for smaller insects, even those with cold resistance, being trapped in snow and ice could be deadly. After several days of arduous travel, Luo Wen finally reached the so-called riverbank. This is a riverbank. Looking out at the vast expanse of water, with occasional drifting ice and a distinctly salty taste, Luo Wen couldn't help but scoff. While the Queen Ant's lack of worldly experience was forgivable, Luo Wen, who had been bombarded with information in his past life and had even seen the real thing, recognized this as a sea. Had the swarm's forces already reached the seashore? This was Luo Wen's first question. Having spent his days in a cycle of eating and sleeping, he had lost track of how much time had passed. Did this planet also have oceans? This was Luo Wen's second question. After all, this was an unfamiliar world to him. Excitement soon bubbled up within him. The ocean undoubtedly concealed countless species, and there might be excellent genes waiting to be harvested. Not long after, he found the Northern Army. The key to quickly locating them after traveling thousands of kilometers lay in Luo Wen following the river originating near the brood nest. After winding through various tributaries, it merged with a larger river and eventually flowed into the ocean. The Northern Army was stationed near this point, leaving pheromone trails along the riverbank to guide Luo Wen to their camp. When Luo Wen arrived at the site, he found a massive underground base had been excavated, complete with mushroom farms. Despite the freezing temperatures, the mushrooms radiated heat, making the interior of the burrow as warm as spring. Unfortunately, the ants seemed to have forgotten to construct a passage large enough for Luo Wen, leaving him to endure the cold outside. This base was home to only a small detachment of 5 or 6 million ants. The main northern army had long since moved on. After all, it took months for messages to travel back and forth. Given the army's size, it couldn't stay in one place for long, as it needed to continuously advance to secure food supplies. The detachment remained behind to await Luo Wen and assist with his operations and experiments. The moment Luo Wen saw the ocean, he understood why the queen ant's report had been contradictory. The raft bugs and submersible bugs hadn't encountered any enemies. Instead, they had perished because their physiology was designed for freshwater and lacked components to filter salt. When they entered the seawater, they were likely overwhelmed by the salinity and died. With no enemies present, exploration became the next priority. During Luo Wen's journey, the detachment had made some progress. They hunted several crustaceans resembling crabs, hermit crabs, and shrimp along the coast. These species were precisely what Luo Wen needed before beginning his oceanic explorations. After consuming samples from each, Luo Wen dug himself a burrow. He then had the burrower ants dig a heat-dissipating channel from the plantation in the base to his room, providing a heater. Once comfortably settled, he rested. When he awoke, Luo Wen noticed the absence of a molted shell in his burrow, which puzzled him. Inspecting his body carefully, he found no discernible changes, no crab-like bookgills or other peculiar features. Scratching his head awkwardly, he muttered, "Strange. Why haven't I grown new respiratory organs?" He speculated that his existing organs might have mutated, a theory requiring practical testing to confirm. Fortunately, the ocean wasn't far. Luo Wen quickly made his way to the shoreline with his long legs. On second thought, he hesitated. It wasn't entirely safe to use himself as a test subject. What if he couldn't tolerate the salinity? The safest approach would be to return to the brood nest to analyze his genes, but the round trip would take too long, and Luo Wen was too impatient to wait. Thus, he crawled toward the estuary where the river met the ocean, creating a transitional zone between freshwater and seawater, a safer place to experiment. Starting in the freshwater, Luo Wen slowly entered the water. Thanks to his acquired diving ability, he wasn't nervous. As the river water engulfed him, he immediately noticed a difference. This time, breathing felt much easier than before. Evidently, a change had occurred. He tried sealing the ventilation pores linking the air sacs between his carapace and abdomen. In the past, doing so would have caused instant suffocation. Yet this time, he felt no such discomfort. He could now breathe underwater naturally. This was true underwater respiration, extracting oxygen directly from the water, unlike his previous pseudo-underwater breathing, which relied on carrying an oxygen tank. Carefully sensing his body, Luo Wen identified the changes. There were two. First, his carapace could filter water, extracting dissolved oxygen to sustain his body. Second, thin membranous structures had grown at the bases of his legs, protruding from the body wall and filled with capillaries. These membranes could also filter water and salt while extracting oxygen. The membranes' location was so hidden, and in Luo Wen's blind spot, that he hadn't noticed them before. The carapace changes were even more subtle, with no outward signs. These subtle modifications explained why Luo Wen hadn't initially realized his new abilities. C93. Into the Sea, 1. Having discovered his new adaptations, Luo Wen trudged through the muddy riverbed, slowly heading toward the river's mouth. The increasingly salty seawater posed no issue for Luo Wen, as his newly developed underwater respiratory system perfectly filtered out the salt content. As he exited the river and ventured into the ocean, the underwater landscape left him somewhat disappointed. Perhaps due to the cold waters, underwater vegetation was scarce. However, the seabed's rocky crevices teemed with shrimp and crabs, some of which even attempted to ambush Luo Wen. Luo Wen's claws remained formidable weapons even underwater, though the resistance from the water made them cumbersome, leaving him little success against the nimble shrimp. However, the crabs that boldly brandished their claws at him didn't fare as well. Luo Wen easily dispatched many of them. Unfortunately, he couldn't eat underwater, nor could he conveniently carry them, leaving him no choice but to abandon this feast of ultra-fresh seafood. As he advanced along the seabed, the water grew deeper, and the pressure exerted on him increased. However, his exoskeleton appeared to have a natural resistance to pressure, so he experienced no significant discomfort. By the time Luo Wen descended to a depth of over 300 meters, sunlight from the surface barely reached this level. While his unique compound eyes allowed him to see in low light, they were powerless in absolute darkness. At around 400 meters deep, the surroundings were utterly black. Fear of the unknown compelled Luo Wen to halt his descent. He inflated the air sacs between his carapace and abdomen, causing his body to ascend slowly toward the surface. As he rose, his surroundings gradually became visible again. Suddenly, a mantis shrimp-like creature darted out of the darkness below, charging toward him at high speed. At just over 10 centimeters long, the creature posed no real threat to Luo Wen, though its agility made it challenging for him to deal with. Although Luo Wen's movements couldn't match the mantis shrimp's swiftness, his excellent dynamic visual system captured its every move. This mantis shrimp differed from the ones he remembered. Its two front limbs weren't sharp scythes, but rather small hammers. The mantis shrimp twisted agilely in the water, closing the distance in a few swift movements. Luo Wen clumsily extended a claw to fend it off, hoping the creature might foolishly blunder into his grip. If the mantis shrimp could speak, it would likely retort, "Keep dreaming." The shrimp suddenly collided with one of Luo Wen's large claws and immediately retaliated. Luo Wen caught a fleeting flash of light in the corner of his eye, followed by a heavy strike against his claw. Luo Wen realized that the mantis shrimp had attacked him with its hammer-like appendages, but even with his dynamic vision, he couldn't clearly follow the attack. After a moment, the mantis shrimp seemed to sense that this massive creature wasn't worth provoking. It quickly turned and vanished into the dark depths. Since growing to his current size, Luo Wen had never been so brazenly challenged. However, glancing at the boundless and shadowy ocean, he knew it would be difficult to avenge himself. Upon surfacing, Luo Wen oriented himself and discovered he was several kilometers from shore. He raised the claw that had been struck and noticed a faint crack. Though the damage was minor, the insult stung deeply, leaving him fuming. After calming down, Luo Wen marveled at the shrimp's strength. His claw was one of the most heavily armored parts of his body. Despite the size disparity, the shrimp's attack had caused visible damage. This wasn't some underhanded trick involving poison. The shrimp's raw power was astonishing. If Luo Wen had been its size, his armor might have been shattered instantly. Since Luo Wen only had one pair of swimming legs, his movement speed in the water was relatively slow. Fortunately, he wasn't in a hurry, and the sea around him was dotted with enormous icebergs, seemingly drifting down from even farther north. Suddenly, his gaze fixed on one of the icebergs. Frozen inside was a strange, oval-shaped, flat-bodied insect of an unknown species. This was a pleasant surprise. Luo Wen had never seen this insect before, and consuming it would likely grant him new genetic fragments. Though uncertain of its utility, he clambered onto the iceberg and laboriously chipped away at the ice with his claw to extract the insect. It was unclear whether the insect was alive or dead. Judging by its appearance, it had been frozen for a long time and was probably lifeless. Still, thanks to being kept on ice, it was impressively fresh. After enjoying a snack, Luo Wen spent some time returning to shore. For now, there wasn't much left for him to do here. Exploring the ocean alone wasn't practical, and he didn't particularly enjoy the cold environment. Although his cold resistance was decent, the chill still dulled his senses, an unpleasant sensation. He ordered the detachment to continue their coastal operations and began his journey back to the brood nest. Upon returning, Luo Wen linked with the brood nest. The first task was to update the pending queen ant production orders, incorporating the new underwater breathing system. As for the frozen insect, genetic analysis revealed its secrets. It possessed a unique hibernation ability, allowing it to enter a dormant state. When Luo Wen had unearthed it, it hadn't been dead, merely in hibernation. No wonder it was so fresh and odor-free. Luo Wen smacked his lips, reminiscing about the seafood's flavor. This talent seemed useless for now, so he set it aside. Several dozen days later, the first batch of upgraded queen ants matured, and Luo Wen immediately dispatched them to establish a base at the coast. Over 100 days later, a dead mantis shrimp was brought to Luo Wen. Having endured a journey of several thousand kilometers, the shrimp was now rotten and reeked unbearably. Luo Wen, though less particular than before, still found it inedible. Determined to savor fresh seafood sashimi, Luo Wen made another arduous trip to the coastal base. By now, the base had expanded significantly and was overseen by a single Type 2 queen ant. The base welcomed Luo Wen without fanfare, merely preparing his old, heated room for his use. After resting for a day, Luo Wen watched as the swarm's naval units embarked on their mission. Due to the base's limited capacity with only one Type 2 queen ant, the number of seaworthy units was modest, comprising just two types of creatures. One was modeled after crabs, while the other was based on shrimp. Each had its advantages. The crab-based units boasted powerful claws and robust shells, granting them high offensive and defensive capabilities, though their mobility was poor. The shrimp-based units, while weaker in attack and defense, utilized a darting swimming method that provided swift movement and erratic trajectories. As for the mantis shrimp, it excelled in both speed and agility, with formidable defense and unparalleled attack power, making it a true overlord of the sea. Thus, relying solely on crabs and shrimp to hunt mantis shrimp would require considerable luck. C-94. Into the sea, too. The shrimp units could match the mantis shrimp in speed, but their attacks were too weak to penetrate its armor, relegating them to reconnaissance roles. Fortunately, mantis shrimp often hid in the sandy seabed, lying in wait to ambush passing prey. Coincidentally, such areas were also the crabs' domain. After several hours of patrolling, hundreds of shrimp scouts finally located a mantis shrimp at a depth of over 200 meters. The crabs soon received the coordinates and moved in. To avoid alarming the mantis shrimp, only two crabs approached its hiding place. Perhaps because the crabs were similar in size to the mantis shrimp, it chose to attack rather than flee. It lunged at one crab, which hurriedly raised its claw in defense. Yet, as the mantis shrimp darted past, one of the crab's claws was severed, floating away. However, the mantis shrimp underestimated the swarm's collective combat tactics. The two crabs had deliberately lured it out. When it paused momentarily to prepare for another strike, the second crab seized the opportunity, leaping forward and pinning the mantis shrimp with its claws. The mantis shrimp, covered in spikes, struggled fiercely. While the crabs' carapaces provided excellent defense, their abdominal armor was relatively soft, and the mantis shrimp managed to pierce them in several places. The injured crab, now reduced to a single claw, used it to grip the mantis shrimp's head and carapace seam. In retaliation, the mantis shrimp unleashed a hammer strike, severing the crab's remaining claw. Even so, the detached claw remained lodged in the mantis shrimp's carapace seam, severely hindering its movements. At this point, the shrimp scouts, which had been waiting nearby, swarmed in. Though incapable of damaging the mantis shrimp's armor, they pushed it toward the crab army. Once surrounded by dozens of crabs, the mantis shrimp's fate was sealed. After savoring a fresh mantis shrimp sashimi dish, Luo Wen indulged in a feast of wild crabs and shrimp before hurriedly returning to the brood nest. Uploading the new genetic data left him astounded. No wonder the mantis shrimp was a dominant predator of the sea. It boasted a wealth of genetic, black technology. After a deep sleep, Luo Wen molted a layer of his claw's armor. While his claws didn't transform into hammers, they gained new structures, and even the armor itself underwent changes. However, an accident occurred during testing. A month later, the swarm version of the mantis shrimp was complete. After various tests, Luo Wen gained a deeper understanding of its capabilities. The first notable feature was its eyes. Equipped with 6 pupils, the eyes could perceive a broader range of colors. While these eyes weren't entirely compatible with Luo Wen's biology, partial integration allowed him to experience a richer and more vivid world. The second and most remarkable trait was its hammer-like forelimbs. A 10 cm long mantis shrimp could generate a force exceeding 150 kilograms with its hammer, which explained how it had cracked Luo Wen's armor. Its hammer strikes were blisteringly fast, accelerating from 0 to 80 kilometers per hour in just 1/300th of a second. This speed created a supercavitation effect, where collapsing bubbles produced a small shockwave and briefly heated the surrounding water to extreme temperatures, emitting a flash of light. Luo Wen realized the flash he'd seen during the mantis shrimp's attack came from this phenomenon, visible only with highly sensitive eyes. Achieving such speeds required more than just physical strength, it necessitated intricate body mechanics. The mantis shrimp's forelimbs featured a hyperbolic system, which stored energy through contraction and released it explosively to launch the hammer. Moreover, this extraordinary mechanism relied on a specialized material. The mantis shrimp's hammer was covered in a 3-layered nanostructure that absorbed energy, resisted cracking, and provided exceptional impact resistance. Despite its impressive resilience, this material had limitations. It could only support the mantis shrimp's hammer at its current size of roughly 1 centimeter. Any larger, and catastrophic failure would occur. Don't ask how Luo Wen discovered this. When he first acquired the technology, he was ecstatic. Rushing to test it, he fully activated the hyperbolic ejection system. The result: a loud sonic boom followed by Luo Wen being violently flung through the air. Worse yet, his claw was forcibly torn from his body and hurled into the distance. Subsequent examination revealed that while the claw had adopted the new nanostructure, it suffered severe burn damage. Thankfully, being severed from Luo Wen's body spared him any direct harm. However, the pain of losing a claw was unbearable, leaving Luo Wen writhing in agony. He began questioning whether retaining a nervous system that could register pain truly counted as an evolutionary advantage. After extensive experiments using mantis shrimp genetics, Luo Wen determined the limits of the system. The maximum hammer size that could withstand the stresses was roughly 2 centimeters, and the system only functioned effectively underwater, where the water could rapidly cool the heat generated by the hyperbolic ejection. Anything larger was a death sentence, as Luo Wen had painfully discovered. Fortunately, he could regenerate his limbs, emerging whole after molting in a cocoon. Given Luo Wen's size of over 60 centimeters, with claws whose main structure alone spanned nearly 30 centimeters, it was impossible to wield a 2-centimeter hammer. The thought of such a setup was simply too humiliating for him to consider. Additionally, the system was only lethal against similarly sized targets. When the mantis shrimp ambushed Luo Wen, it had only managed to create a small crack in his claw. For Luo Wen, the system was akin to a chicken rib, unsatisfying to use but too valuable to discard. Reluctant to waste such a hard-earned technology, he conducted countless tests and adjustments. After losing countless claws and molting multiple times, Luo Wen finally managed to modify the system. This modification was essentially a severe downgrade. Luo Wen sealed off most of the hyperbolic system's power, weakening it repeatedly until it was manageable. Even so, the improved system increased Luo Wen's claw speed severalfold. Combined with his enhanced dynamic visual tracking, he was confident that if he encountered a mantis shrimp again, he could give it a surprise of his own. C-95. The time has come. As time passed, the Eastern and Western armies traversed mountains and rivers, pushing the swarm's territory to the ocean. Only the Southern Army, after conquering the vast desert, pressed on for thousands of kilometers without encountering any sign of the sea. On land, the swarm had become the undisputed ruler. The next frontier was the ocean. Perhaps, by crossing the boundless sea, new continents could be discovered elsewhere on the planet. Along the coastlines marking the edge of the swarm's domain, naval bases sprang up one after another. Large numbers of mantis shrimp, crabs, and other aquatic units were deployed to explore the ocean's depths and breadths. Just as the swarm was about to make a massive push into the sea, Luo Wen felt that familiar sense of opportunity during his connection with the brood nest. This time, it was not vague or elusive but clear and unmistakable. In an instant, Luo Wen experienced an epiphany. The time has come. A sharp screech erupted from his mouth, his antennae thrashing violently as pheromones carrying commands filled the air. For a moment, the surrounding insects seemed to pause, frozen in time. Then, as if an unseen switch had been flipped, life resumed. The insects received their instructions and began spreading the orders like wildfire. Transport bugs carried messenger units, rushing off in all directions. From the brood nest as the epicenter, the command spread outward to the subsidiary bases. Though the instructions were unusual, the swarm, as extensions of Luo Wen, obeyed him with absolute loyalty and without question. Type 2 queen ants in the bases issued commands, resulting in the destruction of nearby aphid farms. The once pampered aphids, accustomed to a life of luxury, fed at leisure and having their waste meticulously cleaned, were suddenly betrayed by their caretakers. Sharp mandibles pierced their bodies, and they were wrapped in a mixture of syrup and saliva to prevent spoilage. Packaged, loaded, transported. The underground plantation suffered a similar fate, subjected to destructive harvesting. Sustainability was abandoned. Even roots and seedlings were uprooted, packed, and preserved. Wild insects within the swarm's territory met grim fates as well. They were subjected to carpet-style eradication. Even the agile and evasive grasshoppers couldn't escape the relentless sweep. After gathering every scrap of food they could carry, the insects from the subsidiary bases began their grand migration toward the brood nest. From an aerial perspective, the vast lands below were dotted with abandoned bases as the swarm relinquished their habitats. They packed everything and converged on a single destination. The region surrounding the brood nest swelled with insects as time went on. During the war with the Yellow Earth Ant Legion, the swarm had been decimated to a tenth of its size. Yet, in just over 200 days, it had recovered to its pre-war numbers of tens of billions. Now, after so much time had passed, With tens of thousands of new queen ants in production, the swarm's numbers had grown beyond reckoning. Despite the insects bringing all their supplies to the brood nest, the sheer number of mouths to feed resulted in massive consumption. Only the resources from nearby areas reached the brood nest with surplus supplies intact. From farther distances, food was mostly consumed during the journey. Fortunately, the insects had a unique talent for eating dirt. While it didn't provide much energy, it was enough to sustain their basic vital functions. The densely packed swarm blanketed the area around the brood nest. For those with a fear of crowded spaces, the sight would have been utterly nightmarish. The ground in this vast region had sunk over 10 meters due to the sheer volume of insects consuming soil. They absorbed a fraction of the nutrients before excreting the rest. Under normal circumstances, these excretions were excellent fertilizer, carried by worker ants to nearby trees. But now, with countless trillions of insects gathered, they produced mountains of waste daily, far beyond any effort to transport it away. Instead, the waste was reused repeatedly. Over 100 days later, even the aquatic units, raft bugs, submersible bugs, and others, had followed the rivers to congregate in the lake near the brood nest. The pivotal moment had finally arrived. On a sunny morning, Luo Wen took a deep breath, gazing at the towering black insect mountains surrounding him. He turned and crawled underground, reconnecting his tail to the brood nest after a long hiatus. All surface-level insects were driven above ground. Luo Wen didn't want anything witnessing the shameful posture required for this process. After all, this was his final form. Calming his thoughts, a piercing screech echoed through the earth. A strange wave of energy radiated from Luo Wen's body, spreading rapidly outward with the sound. Every insect touched by this wave froze briefly before assuming a howling stance. Though many of them were voiceless soldier types, at that moment, they seemed to scream with their very souls. The growing chorus, as more insects joined, rose from faint whispers to earth-shaking roars. Threads of unique energy lifted from the insects, converging on Luo Wen. In Luo Wen's compound eyes, a faint white light appeared, gradually intensifying until it shone 3 feet outward, illuminating the entire underground base. As the gathered energy increased, a qualitative transformation occurred. The dazzling white light took on an eerie, regal purple hue. One by one, the insects closest to Luo Wen expended their mysterious energy, freezing in their howling postures, forever locked in this moment. Despite their small size, the swarm's staggering numbers unleashed an unimaginable force. The insect mountains fell silent, yet Luo Wen's screech grew sharper and more resonant. Finally, the last insect gave its all. At the same time, Luo Wen's screech abruptly ceased. The white-purple glow in his eyes dimmed and receded. Luo Wen's consciousness blurred. The extreme exhaustion was not physical but spiritual, leaving him powerless to resist the pull of sleep. He needed a long hibernation to digest these changes. The brood nest, now withered and shrunken, disconnected from Luo Wen. Summoning his last reserves of energy, he crawled along a pre-dug tunnel toward the depths of the earth. The tunnel led 300 meters underground to a small chamber, barely spacious enough to accommodate Luo Wen. Reinforced countless times by worker ants and mucus bugs, it could withstand earthquakes and other natural disasters. After reaching the chamber, Luo Wen destroyed the tunnel behind him, sealing the entrance. Now without the swarm's protection and uncertain how long he would slumber, caution was paramount. Having completed his preparations, Luo Wen succumbed to the exhaustion of his spirit and fell into a deep sleep. As he slept, a liquid oozed from his body, gradually forming a cocoon that encased him entirely. C-96. The ever-changing seas and lands. Luo Wen had grossly underestimated the duration of his slumber. Though it wasn't unusual for a transcendent being from another world like him to possess peculiar talents, the shift in environment had caused his abilities to mutate beyond his control. After Luo Wen's disappearance, the insect swarm navy wreaked havoc along the coastlines for some time. However, without the ability to reproduce, they gradually faded into history. Arthropods and crustaceans once again claimed dominance in these areas. Meanwhile, deep-sea fish began to venture into the shallows and even attempted to invade the land. Yet, they were no match for the armored, sharp-clawed crustaceans and arthropods that roamed the shores. Despite their agility, these fish remained at the bottom of the food chain. On land, the ecosystem suffered catastrophic damage from the swarm's devastating rampage, leaving behind no eggs or larvae. The disappearance of insects disrupted the ecological balance, giving plants an unprecedented opportunity to flourish. Vegetation grew increasingly dense, absorbing vast amounts of carbon dioxide. As the carbon settled with the decay of plants, atmospheric carbon levels plummeted, leading to a drop in surface temperatures. The plants withered, life dwindled, and the planet became shrouded in frost. Luo Wen, who was supposed to awaken during this period, had consumed a frozen insect on a whim. This insect carried a hyper-hibernation gene that was triggered by Luo Wen's condition and the surrounding environment. Thus, Luo Wen fell into an even deeper slumber, one that was far more profound. As time passed, the ice-covered planet amassed underground energy that could no longer be contained. The pressure eventually culminated in volcanic eruptions. Molten material from beneath the surface broke through the ice, releasing vast amounts of carbon back into the atmosphere. Volcanic ash blanketed the skies. Contrary to expectations of further cooling due to the lack of sunlight, the continuous volcanic activity raised the planet's temperature. Thick layers of ice melted into water vapor that ascended into the skies. High above, the water vapor cooled and, mixed with volcanic ash, fell back to the ground as nutrient-rich rain. Life seized this moment to thrive. Vegetation absorbed the abundant minerals and nutrients from the mantle, sprouting rapidly and releasing large quantities of oxygen. The rising oxygen levels allowed marine organisms to once again attempt their migration to land. A peculiar species of deep-sea fish succeeded in making landfall. The dominance of crustaceans and arthropods was upended by this new arrival. These fish had an epoch-defining innovation: the vertebral column. Vertebrate animals, benefiting from the oxygen-rich environment, grew progressively larger. In contrast, crustaceans and arthropods, though no longer constrained by respiratory limitations in a highly oxygenated atmosphere, faced another challenge. Their exoskeletal armor hindered their ability to grow larger without frequent molting. In primitive conditions, molting required significant energy and left them vulnerable during recovery, ultimately dooming their attempts at gigantism. The few arthropods that succeeded in growing larger did so by retreating to the ocean depths. On land, their efforts invariably failed. Over time, these armored creatures were forced into the lower rungs of the food chain, their habitats encroached upon by the ever-expanding vertebrates. Some vertebrates refrained from growing larger and instead occupied ecological niches formerly held by insects. Others, exploiting the abundant oxygen, pursued gigantism, with some species developing thick keratin layers akin to exoskeletal armor. Meanwhile, insects under pressure began to adapt. One day, certain species unfolded their elytra to reveal wings, a revolutionary adaptation that allowed them to conquer a new ecological niche. This newfound ability to fly was one of evolution's rare success stories achieved with minimal cost. Flying insects, leveraging their unique talents, regained their foothold in the biosphere. Some insects sacrificed their hard exoskeletons to achieve larger sizes, while others prioritized speed and agility. Soon after, vertebrates also took to the skies. Unlike the insects' seemingly effortless adaptation, vertebrates modified their forelimbs into wings. With their larger sizes, flying vertebrates quickly dominated the skies, soaring higher and farther to become the new aerial overlords. Thus, vertebrates came to dominate the land and sky. Only the oceans remained a bastion for a few large crustaceans and arthropods. This ecological evolution occurred on an unnamed alien planet. Any resemblance to Earth is purely coincidental. A green beetle, about 2 to 3 centimeters in size, buzzed its transparent, delicate wings as it searched for food in a patch of low-lying grass. The intricate patterns on its wings were clearly visible. A massive earthquake had recently devastated the area, destroying its familiar hunting grounds. Forced to explore unfamiliar territory, the beetle sought its fortune elsewhere. Suddenly, a flesh-colored streak darted past, and the green beetle vanished. Not far from where the incident occurred, a 20-centimeter-tall giant frog with dark green skin was lazily swallowing something. Its tympanic membranes swelled and contracted as it let out a satisfied "gwa gwa," its relaxed expression exuding contentment. The frog's ears, located behind its eyes, resembled small buttons from afar. Its sensitive ears caught an unusual sound, but it didn't move. Confident in its extraordinary dynamic vision, it believed no creature could ambush it. This blind confidence proved fatal. A violent gust heralded the approach of something fast and deadly. The frog, sensing danger, prepared to leap, but before it could act, an unknown force slammed it into the ground. As the dust settled, the culprit revealed itself, a massive, fearsome claw-like appendage. Its surface was dotted with crater-like pits lined with fine hairs. The claw's sharp tip was embedded in the frog's body. Though the frog wasn't dead yet, its fate was sealed. Following the appendage to its source, one could see it belonged to a 60-centimeter-long giant beetle. Even in this oxygen-rich environment, such a colossal insect was a rare sight on land. In addition to its massive claws, the beetle had 8 spider-like legs, a peculiar combination that made it a true oddity among its kind, the undisputed dandy of the insect world. C97. Awakening. Luo Wen was jolted awake by a cacophony of gua gua sounds. The irritation of being disturbed from his long slumber left him seething with rage. The extended period of hibernation had left his mind sluggish and blank, unable to recall anything immediately. For now, his overwhelming hunger took precedence as his bodily functions slowly resumed. Instinctively, he tore at the cocoon encasing his body. Having been inactive for so long, his movements were stiff and clumsy, as if his body had rusted over. When he finally managed to rip through the cocoon, he found the desiccated material devoid of any nutritional value. To his despair, he discovered another, tougher wall beyond it. Which wretched soul had the nerve to glue this place shut? Luo Wen cursed groggily. The constant, gua gua, noises from above only aggravated his mood further. Gathering a modicum of strength, his massive claws, guided by his keen, high refresh rate compound eyes, began to chip away at a specific point on the wall. At long last, a small hole was breached. With this initial crack, the task became much easier. Luo Wen used his claws to claw, pry, and dig, gradually widening the opening. Chunks of tightly packed dirt began to fall into the enclosed cavern. The hole grew larger until loose, unbonded soil started spilling into the chamber. This soil offered no resistance to Luo Wen's massive claws, unlike the solidified chunks. Luo Wen grabbed some of the loose dirt and stuffed it into his mouth, temporarily alleviating his gnawing hunger. However, the nutrients he could extract from the dirt were minimal, a stopgap solution that couldn't truly sat him. Time was of the essence. After a brief respite, Luo Wen resumed digging. Fortunately, his claws were as effective at tunneling as any specialized burrower's legs. In a short time, he had carved out an upward path. Luckily, the earthquake that had recently shaken the area had caused the Earth's crust to shift, bringing Luo Wen closer to the surface. The once deep cavern was now only 20 or 30 meters underground. Still, this short distance proved to be a grueling challenge. By the time Luo Wen broke through to the surface and inhaled his first breath of fresh air, he was on the verge of total exhaustion. There, he finally found the source of the noise that had awakened him. The sight of a frog with bulbous eyes greeted him. One glance was enough to confirm its exceptional vision. His long dormant camouflage abilities sprang to life. Instinctively, Luo Wen activated them. Colors shifted and shimmered across his body, the once black surface morphing into a dazzling array of hues. In moments, Luo Wen seemed to vanish, blending seamlessly into his surroundings. He crept toward the dark green frog with deliberate care, nervous about his diminished state. This might be his only chance. Success meant meat, failure meant dirt. As his claws neared striking range, the frog appeared to sense something amiss but remained still. Luo Wen exhaled in relief and activated a weakened version of his dual curve attack system. Wind roared as his massive claw pierced the frog's body and continued downward, pinning it deep into the soil. It had been so long since Luo Wen hunted personally that his strength control was off, ruining a portion of the fresh prey. But in his current state, he couldn't afford to be picky. Even if 2 pounds of aphid dung were placed before him, he would have devoured it without hesitation. After gorging himself, Luo Wen felt a small amount of energy return, and his intellect began to reawaken. Memories from before his hibernation trickled back into his mind. Before he could delve deeper into his thoughts, a rhythmic vibration emanated from the ground, sending him into a panic. Another earthquake. He wondered, alarmed. Focusing carefully, he realized that the tremors felt like the movements of a massive creature stomping across the land. Fortunately, the source of the disturbance was still some distance away. Luo Wen's heightened senses, evident in his ability to hear a frog's croak from deep underground, seemed even sharper than before. With the immediate threat averted, Luo Wen took a moment to survey his surroundings. Tall trees lay toppled in all directions, some even uprooted. Cracks riddled the ground, evidence of a seismic event. Yet, the types of trees around him were unfamiliar. Given that the swarm had once dominated most of the continental landmass, unfamiliar flora was a rarity. Then his gaze landed on the spot where the frog had vanished, and realization dawned. This species was something he had encountered during his human days. Since becoming an insect, he hadn't seen anything like it. The realization prompted 3 soul-piercing questions. How long was I asleep? Where am I? Have I crossed into another world again? The scant information available, coupled with the unknown conditions outside, made exploration too risky. For now, Luo Wen prioritized regrowing the brood nest. After all, his path was that of the collective. Without subordinates, he felt an unsettling emptiness. The area was once home to a small stream, but the earthquake had altered the terrain. The stream now needed to carve a new path. The region was scattered with small pools of water, and thin trickles flowed beneath the fallen trees and weeds. Occasionally, the croaks of frogs echoed from the surroundings. Luo Wen's fine body scales began to work, cloaking him from sight. Avoiding the pools as much as possible, he crept toward the source of the sounds. While frogs were natural predators of insects, perfectly equipped to catch them, the massive size difference between these frogs and Luo Wen rendered such predation irrelevant. For example, if humans were the size of ants, they wouldn't stand a chance unarmed. But with the size disparity in their favor, a single stomp could decimate an ant colony. Here, the frogs were too small, their abilities countered by Luo Wen's stealth. Their eyes, evolved to track swift flying insects, were useless against his camouflage. Robbed of their advantage, the frogs couldn't even flee in time. After skewering and devouring several frogs, Luo Wen's hunger remained unappeased. His body was severely depleted, and the frogs were quickly metabolized into energy. During his hunt, Luo Wen noticed several flying insects flitting about. Flight had once been a coveted ability of his. Back when the swarm controlled vast territories, he had never seen a single flying insect. Yet here, they seemed ubiquitous. This revelation sparked his three soul-piercing questions once again. The small insects, due to their size, proved challenging for Luo Wen's claws. Even with the weakened dual curve system, his attacks were straightforward and inflexible, unsuited for such agile targets. Fortunately, Luo Wen had more than just claws in his arsenal. Against these nimble, small targets, he had a far more effective weapon. C-98, Pterodactyl. A long, fur-covered leg darted out from the void like lightning. Guided by Luo Wen's superior dynamic vision, it struck a flying green beetle with pinpoint accuracy. The fine, adhesive hairs on the claw at the leg's tip gripped the green beetle tightly, pulling it toward Luo Wen. To Luo Wen, this beetle was akin to a miraculous little pill that could sprout wings. Without hesitation, he popped it into his mouth. Crunch. After skewering a few more frogs, Luo Wen encountered yet another unfamiliar creature. By now, he was growing numb to the bizarre sights, and the idea of having traversed to another world filled his mind again. This animal stood nearly half a meter tall, resembling a cross between a rat and a dog. Its muzzle wasn't pronounced, leaning toward a flat shape, and a cluster of white whiskers sprouted from its chin, giving it a goofy expression. Its smooth, light yellow fur covered its entire body. This was the first furred creature Luo Wen had seen since becoming an insect, an apparent mammal. The creature's stocky, short limbs were folded beneath its body as it squatted on the ground, gnawing on an unknown plant fruit cradled in its forelimbs. Its round, beady eyes scanned its surroundings warily. Behind it trailed a thick, unusual tail, common enough in concept, but this specific style was truly unique. Luo Wen decided to invite it for dinner to discuss the mysteries of genetic evolution. Fearful it might decline, he activated his optical camouflage and cautiously approached. His claws gradually entered attack range, but the creature's keen vigilance became evident. Though Luo Wen's optical camouflage rendered him invisible, unavoidable sounds betrayed his movements. The peculiar animal froze mid-bite, its hidden ears pricking through its fur. Although it detected nothing specific, its cautious instincts prompted it to retreat. Grabbing the fruit in its mouth, it lowered itself onto all fours and prepared to leave. Suddenly, a massive beetle burst from behind it. The speed of the ambush caused a brief disruption in Luo Wen's optical camouflage, rendering him momentarily iridescent. One claw struck the strange creature's body first. While its dense fur provided decent defense against piercing attacks, the immense force accompanying the strike sent it flying and inflicted significant damage. Luo Wen leapt forward in a burst, closing the gap as the creature struggled to rise. Seizing the moment, he lunged, wrapping his entire body around it. His 8 legs locked it in place. Although not his primary weapons, Luo Wen's legs were lined with spines and bristles, adding formidable offensive capability that had seen little use until now. He also possessed another underutilized weapon, venom. The spider-derived fangs he had gained from his genetic template had rarely seen action. Until now, Luo Wen had faced few opponents of similar size. Most battles were decided by sheer physical dominance, and his growing swarm had all but eliminated the need for personal combat. This creature, measuring half a meter long, was smaller and weaker than Luo Wen, but it finally allowed him to put his full arsenal to use. His fangs pierced through the creature's fur and into its body. Venom glands emptied their contents swiftly through the hollow channels in his fangs. Inexperienced with venom use, Luo Wen erred on the side of caution and injected the entire dose. Sensing the imminent threat to its life, the strange creature struggled violently. Unfortunately, its stout, sharp-looking claws couldn't penetrate Luo Wen's armor. Realizing its futile struggle, the creature launched a desperate counterattack. Seizing an opportunity, it bit down on the joint of Luo Wen's claw. Although the joint was armored, the inner curve had thinner plating for mobility. The creature's two sharp incisors punctured the joint membrane with ease. The injury was minor, but the incisors became stuck, rendering them immovable. For a moment, an awkward silence settled between predator and prey. Then, a bizarre cry echoed from above, rapidly growing closer. In all his past battles, Luo Wen had never been attacked from the sky. While his nearly 360-degree field of vision covered most threats, he instinctively overlooked aerial dangers. Moreover, while his compound eyes excelled in detail and refresh rate, their range was limited. Despite constant improvements, his maximum field of view was only around 300 meters. Previously, when his enemies were either blind or nearsighted, 300 meters felt like an expansive range. Now, it fell short. The source of the cry finally appeared in Luo Wen's sight, and what he saw left him dumbstruck. It was a pterodactyl. What kind of crazy place is this? Luo Wen wondered, as his mind reeled with the three soul-piercing questions once again. But this wasn't the time for deep reflection. The pterodactyl folded its wings and dove, its massive body accelerating rapidly under gravity's pull. It closed the 300-meter distance in an instant. For the first time, Luo Wen faced such a predicament. Entangled with the strange creature, his mobility was severely limited. The venom had subdued his prey, leaving its full weight dangling from its incisors locked into Luo Wen's claw joint. If Luo Wen had been alone, he could have easily escaped using his powerful leap or optical camouflage. But what had been a promising meal just moments ago had now become a deadly burden. Despite his frantic attempts to free himself, his claws lacked the dexterity of fingers, and his panic only caused the incisors to lodge more firmly. Left with no choice, Luo Wen activated his optical camouflage, hoping against hope that the pterodactyl wouldn't see him. It was a self-deceptive comfort at best. As the pterodactyl neared the ground, its folded wings spread wide, transforming its dive into a glide as it passed just above Luo Wen. Relieved, Luo Wen exhaled, until the pterodactyl banked sharply, adjusted its posture, and flew straight at him again. This time, the pterodactyl extended its massive talons. It was enormous, its wings casting a dark shadow over the ground as it passed. Luo Wen estimated its wingspan to be at least 7 or 8 meters. If they could communicate, Luo Wen might have tried to reason with it, pointing out the absurdity of attacking two measly creatures barely half a meter long. The pterodactyl dove again, its talons grasping the furred creature. Unfortunately for Luo Wen, he was tangled with his prey and was swept up along with it into the pterodactyl's grip. C-99. Aerial combat. The pterosaur had not expected an additional gain. After seizing its prey, it began a rapid ascent. The fierce wind howled past, and the intense air pressure made Luo Wen's eyes feel extremely uncomfortable, impairing his vision. His eyes started secreting fluid, forming a thin membrane-like covering. This was a skill Luo Wen had acquired from the submersible bug. Unexpectedly, it proved not only effective underwater but also quite useful in the sky. Regaining his ability to see, Luo Wen noticed the ground rapidly receding until it faded beyond his vision, becoming a blur. This indicated that he had been carried to at least 300 meters above the ground, and the pterosaur showed no sign of stopping as it continued to ascend. Since becoming an insect, Luo Wen had only suffered during the initial hatching phase. Once the brood nest was established, he had gradually begun living a life akin to a lord. If he hadn't been so picky himself, he could have even had dedicated bugs feeding him. This perilous situation was something Luo Wen hadn't encountered in a long time. Adding to his troubles, he had only recently awakened, his mind was still groggy, and his stomach was yet to be filled. Surrounded by strange creatures, he felt as though he were in a dream, a surreal and unreal experience. Yet, the smooth fur beneath his hands, the hard claws gripping him, and the occasional cheerful chirps from the creature above kept pulling Luo Wen back to reality. Shaking his head to clear his thoughts, Luo Wen realized he could no longer discern his altitude. White clouds surrounded him, and the temperature had dropped sharply, though the cold didn't pose much of a threat to him. It was unclear where the pterosaur intended to take him, but it was unlikely to be a friendly place. Once there, his single opponent might turn into a group. This was not a flight Luo Wen wanted to continue. He had to find a way to disembark early. Though the pterosaur's large wingspan made it appear massive, its actual body was likely less than 2 meters long. From Luo Wen's angle, he could even see its unprotected soft underbelly. Moreover, Luo Wen had a tremendously powerful long-range attack that he had never used in combat before. Extending his right claw, he assumed an attack posture. The full-powered hyperbolic system began charging, aimed directly at the target. Even a weakened version of the hyperbolic system was challenging for Luo Wen to control. Now, with the complete version, aiming was purely a matter of chance. To make matters worse, both the pterosaur and Luo Wen were in rapid motion. The turbulence from the pterosaur's flight made it difficult for him to stabilize. Whether he could hit the target was anyone's guess. But the arrow was nocked. There was no turning back. A deafening sonic boom resounded as the hyperbolic system fully discharged. In that instant, Luo Wen's right claw accelerated to supersonic speed, detaching from his body and shooting upward into the sky before vanishing. The pterosaur's body was struck first on its right side, leaving a gash. The attack then pierced through the base of its wing. The claw's extreme speed generated such high temperatures that the wounds cauterized instantly, leaving the pterosaur with barely a drop of blood lost. If this had occurred on land, Luo Wen's self-sacrificial attack might have gone to waste. However, at such close range, the damage was not limited to mere physical trauma. Before the pterosaur could even register the pain, a massive sonic boom followed, stunning it. The unexpected impact left the pterosaur dizzy, its head ringing. Reeling from the dual blow, the pterosaur involuntarily released its grip, losing its prey as it began spiraling downward, its punctured wing leaking air. Although Luo Wen had escaped its claws, he was far from safe. The pterosaur's earlier cheerful calls had attracted its kin, which had been lurking in the clouds. Now, seeing the first pterosaur lose its prey, they swarmed toward the falling Luo Wen. Due to their position beyond his line of sight, Luo Wen couldn't tell how many of them were preparing to attack. But based on the sounds coming from different directions, he estimated there were at least 3. With his right claw already lost in pursuit of its dream and his left claw jammed at the joint by the bizarre creature's teeth, Luo Wen was in free fall, unable to leverage any foothold. It was as though he had entirely lost the ability to resist. The situation was even more dire than before. Faced with a life and death crisis, Luo Wen's intellect surged. He displayed a hidden talent. This skill, borrowed from a type of deep-sea crab, involved deliberately shedding a claw when facing an irresistible attack to distract the predator while escaping. Luo Wen had never imagined he would need this skill, having long since forgotten it. Caught off guard by the aerial assault, he had been half a beat too slow to react decisively. Had he shed his claw the moment the pterosaur attacked, he wouldn't have had so much trouble later. But there was no point dwelling on past mistakes. The situation was what it was, and he could only treat it as a valuable lesson for the future. At the root joint of his left claw, a segment opened, detaching the claw. As it fell away, Luo Wen used his legs to push it, along with the attached creature, with all his might. The recoil sent Luo Wen hurtling in the opposite direction. Simultaneously, he activated his optical camouflage system. Though the rapid motion caused a slight delay in the system's operation, the monochromatic sky environment minimized its impact. From the pterosaur's perspective, the peculiar yellow-furred creature seemed to glide a short distance through the air. Then, the black insect clinging to its back vanished entirely. Their limited brain capacity didn't allow the pterosaurs to ponder deeply. They pursued the brightly colored creature instead. The smaller pterosaurs began a fierce aerial struggle. Their sizes were nowhere near that of the first pterosaur, which was why they had dared only to trail and not snatch the prey before. But now that the larger predator was injured and retreating, the prey it had dropped became the prize for their persistence. Being similar in size, none of the smaller pterosaurs could easily overpower the others. As their quarry approached the ground, they grew increasingly desperate, as the ground was not their domain. Driven by the mindset of, a bite is better than nothing, one pterosaur took the initiative and jabbed its sharp beak into the creature. Unbeknownst to them, the peculiar creature had long since died. Its muscles had liquefied under the effects of Luo Wen's excessive venom injection. Though its skeleton and fur held its shape, it was essentially a giant water balloon. Under the pterosaur's attack, the creature's thick hide gradually tore open, unable to withstand the pressure. Finally, With a loud pop, the creature exploded. The sudden eruption and splattering fluids startled the pterosaurs, scattering them. By the time they looked back, all that remained was a tattered patch of fur drifting in the wind. C-100. Landing. The aerial battle above was beyond Luo Wen's field of vision, and now, he faced a new problem. The last time he experienced a free fall from such a height, he had been no larger than a fingernail, and various forces could easily affect his descent. Even a gentle breeze could significantly slow his fall. That earlier experience had ingrained a certain mindset in him. High-altitude falls couldn't harm him. However, his current body was over 60 centimeters long, and while his thick exoskeletal armor provided strong protection, it was not light. His weight might now exceed 50 kilograms. At such a mass, only a strong gale could slow his descent. Unfortunately, the weather was sunny and calm, with not even a breeze in the air, let alone a gale. In this situation, Luo Wen wasn't sure if his body could withstand the impact of landing safely. He couldn't leave things to fate. He needed to draw on his meager knowledge to improve his chances of survival. Stretching out all 8 of his legs to increase his body's surface area, he tried to maximize resistance. His rapid descent slowed slightly, providing a momentary buffer, but it was far from enough to stop him from plummeting. Luo Wen cursed under his breath. If he could just sleep for a bit, maybe he'd grow a pair of wings and avoid such indignities altogether. Thankfully, he had already shed his 2 heaviest claws earlier. Otherwise, those alone, each weighing 7 or 8 kilograms, would have added significantly to his burden. Suddenly, an idea struck him. The air sacs located between his carapace and abdomen began inflating rapidly. These sacs, initially designed as underwater oxygen tanks, had become almost redundant after Luo Wen acquired underwater breathing capabilities. Unexpectedly, they now proved invaluable. It truly seemed that no skill was ever useless, a fact the ancients were right about. The air sacs expanded to their limit, even distorting Luo Wen's abdomen. But the effect was remarkable, significantly reducing his descent speed. However, this created a new issue. The sacs were located in the rear half of his body, causing Luo Wen's position to shift from a horizontal spread to a head-down dive. With his claws gone, he had no way to shield his head and would have to rely on his armor to endure the impact. This was far from an ideal outcome. As the ground drew closer, tall treetops began appearing in Luo Wen's field of vision. He struggled to align his fall toward the treetops. Despite his efforts, his descent trajectory barely changed. Luckily, the forest below was dense, with layer upon layer of interwoven tree canopies that blocked out the sunlight. From above, the ground beneath the foliage was completely obscured. When he was about 10 meters above the treetops, Luo Wen strained his body into a pull-up motion. Using his immense core strength, he lifted his head momentarily. In that instant, his carapace and abdomen compressed together, forcefully expelling the air from the sacs. The resulting jet of air shifted Luo Wen's trajectory by a few centimeters. He then spread out his legs and fell onto the treetop. The canopy couldn't bear his weight, and Luo Wen crashed through the layers of branches and leaves, continuing his descent toward the ground. The branches scratched against his body, but at most, they left faint marks on his exoskeleton armor, far from piercing it. These scratches, however, steadily reduced his falling momentum. Finally, after multiple layers of cushioning, Luo Wen landed on the ground. The impact caused only mild vibrations, hardly enough to qualify as a light injury. Upon landing, Luo Wen didn't dare linger. His fall had made quite a commotion. Furthermore, the moment he entered the canopy, his compound eyes caught sight of another treetop shaking violently nearby. Given the height and thickness of the trees, whatever caused such movement had to be a massive creature. Having already encountered pterosaurs, Luo Wen had no desire to satisfy any curiosity. He had lost both claws, depleted the venom stored in his glands, and, having not eaten enough, was now severely exhausted, a state of extreme vulnerability. His best course of action was to lie low, sleep, and regenerate his claws. Maybe he'd even sprout a pair of wings. Unfortunately, without claws that could double as digging tools, burrowing into the ground was out of the question. And given his unfamiliar surroundings, finding a suitable tree hollow in the short term seemed equally unlikely. Luckily, the dense forest floor was covered with a thick layer of decomposing leaves. Though the smell was unpleasant, this was no time to be picky. Luo Wen began by biting into an exposed tree root nearby, intending to quench his thirst. This familiar action reminded him of his days of weakness, evoking a sense of nostalgia. But he was no longer the size of a fingernail. It took him biting into 7 or 8 spots and nearly half an hour to drink his fill. In the distance, vibrations reached Luo Wen's sensitive leg hairs. He had learned his lesson, however, keeping his optical camouflage active throughout. The local creatures seemed to have sharp vision, making his previously underappreciated stealth feature incredibly effective. During this time, Luo Wen even managed to ambush a few small, brightly colored birds. Their feathers were stunningly vibrant, but now they were gathering for a meeting in Luo Wen's stomach. The birds were so small and feathery that Luo Wen couldn't taste much before they were gone, leaving him wanting more. What he wouldn't give for one of those plump, yellow-furred creatures from before, something that was large and filling. As he gnawed on the tree root, Luo Wen's mouth watered at the thought. Finally full, he sought a complex terrain to hide in. He found a spot between 3 giant trees. The thick trunks formed a natural barrier, making it difficult for creatures to pass through, evident from the undisturbed layer of fallen leaves. Unaware of what large predators might be roaming, Luo Wen didn't want to risk falling asleep somewhere only to be crushed underfoot by a passing behemoth. Using his legs, he clumsily scraped out a hole in the decaying leaves. Taking a deep breath, he buried his head inside and covered the entrance. Surrounded by the damp and sticky decay, Luo Wen let his mind drift to distract himself, eventually falling asleep. His exact location remained a mystery, and the duration of his slumber was unclear. Since waking, countless unexpected events had occurred, leaving him with little time to explore the myriad abilities acquired through the self-sacrifice of trillions of bugs in the past. TC-101. Predation. According to the information Luo Wen initially received through the brood nest, this talent should have been innate from his hatching. However, this mysterious planet lacked a specific type of energy required for Luo Wen's abilities to manifest, leaving them dormant since his birth here. Later, through the connection to the brood nest and the self-sacrifice of countless bugs, a unique energy, derived from life and soul, replaced the original required energy, successfully activating Luo Wen's talent. Yet, due to the environmental and energy differences, this talent underwent unknown changes. It became unique, completely different from that of any other Iphiash. At present, Luo Wen only knew that there was now a peculiar energy in his mind. While intangible, he could clearly sense its presence, a phenomenon that defied all logic. This revelation was a blow to Luo Wen, who had been raised with a firm belief in science and materialism. But then he thought about how he had been transformed into an insect by a green-haired old pervert. Compared to that, a strange energy in his brain seemed almost mundane. Still, the one-of-a-kind nature of this energy meant that discovering how to use it required constant trial and error. For now, what Luo Wen needed most was sleep. His consciousness gradually sank into darkness as a layer of cocoon enveloped him. When he woke up, Luo Wen let out a relieved sigh. This place wasn't completely safe, but luckily, no mishaps had occurred. His claws had regrown, and their once soft exoskeleton quickly hardened as he emerged from the cocoon. Luo Wen tested them briefly. They were as agile as before and fully functional. He was no stranger to regrowing claws. During his experiments with the hyperbolic system, losing claws had been a regular occurrence. However, losing both at once was a first. Glancing at his carapace, Luo Wen carefully sensed it. After a moment, he concluded that this cocooning hadn't granted him wings. He had anticipated this. The energy supply before cocooning had been insufficient. While he appeared full, most of it had been nutrient poor. Water. Growing back both claws had already exceeded expectations. The hunger pangs and overall weakness he felt reminded him that this extraordinary regeneration came at a cost. While his exoskeleton concealed it, removing the armor would reveal severely atrophied and emaciated muscles. His top priority was finding food, preferably a hearty, all-meat feast. Meat-based energy conversion far outstripped that of tree sap. Carefully sensing his surroundings, Luo Wen detected nothing unusual. Even the vibrations from afar had ceased. Cautiously crawling out of his leaf-covered burrow, he used his legs to clean off the grime sticking to his body. Such dirt could create imperfections in his optical camouflage system. His legs moved rapidly. Luo Wen's legs, with their numerous joints and reverse joint capabilities, were highly versatile, a talent he used frequently, particularly for cleaning. Activating his optical camouflage had become second nature to him in a short time. Previously, surrounded by other bugs, pheromones were the primary means of identifying friend from foe. Luo Wen had rarely needed to act personally by the time he gained this talent. Yet now, it proved to be far more useful than he had ever imagined. It reminded him of how, During the pheromone era, bugs were easily countered by spy bugs. This realization served as a warning. He needed to develop multiple detection methods to avoid being too easily countered. Moving cautiously among the towering trees, Luo Wen proceeded carefully. Previously, he only needed to watch for enemies from the ground or underground, which his leg hair sensory system could detect from a distance. In the past, few enemies could sneak up on him thanks to these skills. Now, however, he also had to guard against attacks from the sky, elevating his enemy detection to three-dimensional levels. While his nearly omnidirectional vision was an advantage, it was similar to how untrained humans often overlooked peripheral stimuli. It would take him some time to fully adapt to information from above. Fortunately, this adjustment wouldn't take long. Since awakening, Luo Wen's ability to process information had increased significantly. It felt like upgrading a computer's CPU, handling additional visual data barely taxed his mental capacity. Luo Wen walked lightly and slowly, carefully placing each step. He even kept his swimming legs raised, using only 6 ordinary legs to minimize noise. His camouflage only fooled visual senses, it didn't mask sound. To avoid alerting enemies or prey, he strove to remain silent. Occasionally, small bugs flitting through the forest vanished as if transported elsewhere, never to reappear. Strange calls echoed intermittently around him, most of which Luo Wen couldn't identify. Only one was familiar. It belonged to the small birds that had gathered in his stomach the previous day. Aside from these birds, Luo Wen noticed numerous other avian species perched on branches, preening their feathers. These birds, small in size and insectivorous, thrived in the dense forest. There were no pterosaurs here. Their larger size and superior flight capabilities allowed them to soar higher and farther. The dense forest canopy obstructed their vision, and the complex terrain of the undergrowth was unsuitable for their wings, which were prone to injury in such an environment and difficult to heal. Birds, on the other hand, didn't face these issues. Losing a few feathers didn't impair their flight, and feathers regenerated quickly. This forest was their domain. Here, only a select few creatures posed a threat to them, and Luo Wen was one of them. Although he couldn't yet fly, climbing trees was a trivial task for Luo Wen, who could move effortlessly even on cliff faces. A few singing, brightly feathered birds suddenly disappeared one by one, leaving behind only a handful of feathers to mark their fate. For Luo Wen, these small birds and insects were mere snacks. The energy gained from eating them was only marginally better than tree sap. Tree sap provided low energy but was a consistent source. Small birds and insects, though meat, were sparse and, when factoring in time spent hunting, barely outperformed tree sap in energy efficiency. Suddenly, Luo Wen's eyes narrowed. In the distance, a green stream flowed down from the canopy of a massive tree, trickling along the trunk before disappearing into the ground and beyond his sight. This familiar sight filled Luo Wen with both excitement and renewed confusion. C-102. Digging a base. The unfamiliar environment and strange creatures gradually convinced Luo Wen of the reality that he had traversed worlds once more. This time, however, he had crossed over along with his insectoid body. But who could have anticipated that at such a moment, a creature he recognized would appear? Beneath the leaves, with heads resembling buttocks, black exoskeletons, and a coordinated infantry armor patrol pattern, they were unmistakably the big-headed ants he was familiar with. What the hell is going on here? For a moment, Luo Wen felt as if his newly upgraded CPU was overheating. If he hadn't traversed worlds, it meant his hibernation period had been unimaginably long, long enough for the world outside to undergo seismic changes and for species to evolve. But if he had traversed, it would mean the genetic blueprint of the big-headed ants was so potent that an identical species had evolved elsewhere. Luo Wen's movie-trained mind ventured further, considering the possibility of alien experiments or the presence of unknown human interference. He also speculated, perhaps inspired by Lost World movies, about a hidden continent that harbored these extraordinary species, which later thrived and expanded to conquer other lands. The hypotheses and conjectures multiplied in his mind, turning his thoughts into a tangled mess. Shaking his head vigorously, Luo Wen forced himself to calm down. Perhaps this situation was advantageous for him. A diverse array of species implied a rich gene pool. As long as he had a little time to recover, Luo Wen was confident he could uncover the truth. He quietly approached the green stream, scouting for targets. The worker ants carrying leaves were not his prey. Only the ultra-giant soldier ants, those wandering at the edges of the group and crawling with small soldier ants, were worthy of becoming his feast. These creatures were pure protein. Just a few of them could fill Luo Wen's stomach. However, the small soldier ants crawling all over them posed an annoyance. If he couldn't clear them out quickly and became entangled, he'd be in trouble, especially now, being alone. Previously, ultra-giant soldier ants had some small soldier ants on them for protection, but never as many as now. Observing the small birds circling above the ants, Luo Wen made a guess. It was now an era of fully integrated, multidimensional combat. It made sense to bring extra aerial units as protection. Luo Wen had a certain area of effect skill perfect for this scenario. However, it reminded him of unpleasant memories. Yet, with the pressure and crisis he felt, he could no longer afford hesitation. Activating pheromone camouflage and optical invisibility simultaneously, Luo Wen stealthily approached. A patrolling ultra-giant soldier ant was suddenly engulfed by a cloud of white mist on its flank. Instantly, a barrage of liquid projectiles, infused with high temperatures and strong corrosiveness, sprayed toward it. The relentless assault inflicted severe damage immediately. Despite its injuries, the ultra-giant soldier ant's sheer size kept it from dying on the spot. Unfortunately for the small soldier ants riding on its back, they weren't so lucky. With Luo Wen's massive form unleashing such a concentrated attack, the high heat and strong acid quickly incapacitated and withered them. After one round of attacks, the air reeked of a foul stench. The lingering white mist was abruptly dispersed by a strong gust of wind, revealing a vibrant colored claw-like appendage. The claw clamped onto the ultra-giant soldier ant's body and, amid its fierce struggles, dragged it into the underbrush, disappearing from sight. The entire operation happened in the blink of an eye. Due to their limited reconnaissance capabilities, the big-headed ants' leaf harvesting team didn't even notice the attack. Soon after, several other patrolling ultra-giant soldier ants also vanished. Only then did the big-headed ants sense something was amiss. Unfortunately for them, by this time, the hunter had already retreated with his spoils. Luo Wen hadn't gone far. For one, there were too many prey to carry. Secondly, for a creature like the big-headed ants, with poor vision, cutting off their pheromone signals meant Luo Wen could stay within a meter of them and still avoid detection. Back in his days with the reconnaissance squad, they'd exploited this weakness of the big-headed ants to great advantage. Luo Wen was particularly skilled at it. After feasting, Luo Wen took advantage of the big-headed ants' relaxed defenses to hunt a few more ultra-giant soldier ants. Finally, he felt somewhat satiated. Following the green stream, for over 100 meters, he caught sight of the big-headed ant's nest from afar. Not far from the nest, at a location with complex terrain, Luo Wen began digging. With his stomach full, it was time to construct a base. Building near the big-headed ant's nest was an excellent choice for establishing his territory. By deploying misleading pheromones in the area, Luo Wen could ensure the new base's security during its early stages. Though it had been a long time since Luo Wen last dug a burrow himself, his skills were far from rusty. Even though he now used his claw-like appendages for digging, his efficiency remained high. However, his large size made the excavation a considerable undertaking. With no other insects to assist him, Luo Wen could only dig a bit and then push the soil out of the burrow. This approach slowed progress significantly. As the burrow extended underground, the sky gradually darkened. When Luo Wen once again pushed soil out of the burrow, night had fully fallen. Threads of moonlight stubbornly filtered through the canopy, casting a serene, distant glow on the ground. Luo Wen lay at the entrance of the burrow, gazing at the moonlight in a daze. Suddenly, as if struck by an idea, he darted out and climbed a nearby tree at high speed. At the treetop, a black insect was lost in thought. "This is still the original planet," Luo Wen murmured. He suddenly realized how simple it was to verify. In the sky, two light sources hung high, one slightly yellowish white and the other faintly red. They were unmistakably familiar. How long have I been asleep? Luo Wen fell into contemplation. Unexpectedly, his hibernation ability had such hidden risks. Thinking back, he was fortunate the noisy frog had woken him up earlier. Otherwise, who knew how much longer he would have slept? Though this hibernation skill was remarkably effective, slowing his body's state to near stasis, it couldn't hide its glaring flaw. Now that Luo Wen was certain of his location and had dismissed those implausible theories, he felt much more at ease. With his sense of crisis significantly reduced, even digging lost its appeal. The late hour called for rest. Camouflaging the burrow entrance, Luo Wen burrowed into a pile of decaying leaves nearby and fell into a deep sleep. As for why he didn't sleep inside the burrow, a single passage burrow without escape routes wasn't secure enough for Luo Wen's peace of mind. C-103. Flight. The ultra-giant soldier ants were a marvel of biology, managing to achieve such massive sizes despite the severely outdated oxygen supply system typical of ant physiology. They relied entirely on their incredibly dense and powerful muscles to physically pump oxygen throughout their bodies. This impressive muscle density also translated into a highly efficient energy conversion rate. When Luo Wen awoke, not only had he grown wings, but his brood nest had also regenerated. Previously, Luo Wen had only speculated about the possibility of his brood nest regenerating. Now, with his hypothesis confirmed, he finally breathed a sigh of relief. Perhaps due to insufficient energy supply during growth, the regenerated brood nest appeared somewhat underdeveloped. However, this was only in relation to Luo Wen's large size. Compared to its initial state when it was first formed, the reborn brood nest was already several times larger. Scooping up some rotting branches and leaves from the surroundings, Luo Wen stuffed them into the feeding orifice of the brood nest. Though this first meal for the regenerated brood nest was lackluster, the circumstances left little room for luxury. Something was better than nothing. The brood nest wasn't nearly as picky as Luo Wen. Ever since it acquired earthworm genes, it could even consume soil and pebbles, earning it the title of everything within sight is edible. Rotting leaves, therefore, were an effortless choice. After attending to the brood nest, Luo Wen crawled out of his burrow. If not for the importance of the brood nest, he would have been unable to suppress his excitement. Soaring freely through the blue sky was a dream cherished by all living creatures. Luo Wen, whether in his past human life or his current insect form, had always longed for a pair of wings of his own. Now, that dream had come true. The sturdy black carapace on his back split open and lifted upward, revealing a pair of delicate, transparent wings that unfolded. The intricate patterns on the wings were clearly visible, with black accents along their edges and roots. The wings began to vibrate, their speed increasing rapidly. Gradually, Luo Wen's cumbersome body lifted off the ground. Though his first flight was clumsy, rocking left and right with a constant risk of crashing, Luo Wen couldn't help but emit a hiss of exhilaration. Flying was a highly energy-intensive activity. For Luo Wen, using a pair of thin, translucent wings to lift his tens of kilograms heavy body required an immense amount of energy. Still recovering from hibernation and with his energy reserves critically low, Luo Wen was forced to land after less than half a minute of flight, having barely risen 20 centimeters off the ground. While Luo Wen felt a twinge of disappointment, he didn't complain. After all, his wings weren't rented. There was plenty of time to enjoy them once he'd eaten his fill. Meanwhile, the big-headed ants' leaf-cutting convoy, after enjoying 2 days of relative peace, suffered another ambush. Several ultra-giant soldier ants were lost to an unknown assailant during transportation. Infuriated, the big-headed ants dispatched a large force to sweep the area of the attack, but all they found were lingering stench and chaotic pheromone trails. The perpetrator had long since vanished. Replenished and brimming with energy, Luo Wen even brought 2 ants back to his brood nest to hasten its recovery. Once everything was in order, he eagerly began his second flight experiment. In the jungle, a large black beetle hovered half a meter above the ground, flying at a leisurely pace. Its mandibles and limbs dangled naturally as its wings beat so quickly that even their afterimages blurred. Despite successfully flying, Luo Wen couldn't help feeling a bit disheartened. He could fly, sure, but it wasn't anything like what he'd envisioned. In his imagination, flight meant dazzling aerial maneuvers, breakneck speeds, and intense dogfights with opponents, reminiscent of the pterosaurs battling for food in the sky he'd once witnessed. But now, watching the scenery slowly recede around him, Luo Wen realized his flight speed was slower than his crawling speed on the ground. The gap between expectation and reality left him momentarily uninspired. At this speed, the only advantage he could think of was avoiding embarrassment during another free-fall situation like last time. However, his slow flight wasn't due to a lack of capability in his flying system. On the contrary, his wings incorporated several advanced technologies. First, Luo Wen had developed a set of muscles dedicated to wing movement. The protein fibers within these muscles were highly organized, with cross-sections forming a precise hexagonal pattern. This structural regularity allowed for rapid wing vibrations. Luo Wen's wings flapped at a standard rate of over 1,000 times per minute, with a maximum speed exceeding 20,000 flaps per minute. However, such high-speed flapping generated significant noise and consumed a massive amount of energy, though it did considerably increase flight speed. The wings themselves were membranous and featured hidden folding patterns. When in use, the elytra wing covers opened, and the concealed wings unfurled like umbrellas. Retracting the wings was a bit more complex. It required leveraging the elasticity and flexibility within the wings' internal structures to fold them back along their creases. In simpler terms, the wings needed to be folded back into place. Initially, Luo Wen struggled with this operation. After folding his wings in elytra, parts of the wings remained exposed. Assuming this was normal, he paid it little attention. Later, after observing green beetles, he realized the wings could be fully retracted. It required the assistance of his hind legs to manually push the wings back under the elytra, where they would automatically fold along their creases. Even with these features, the wings alone wouldn't have been sufficient to lift Luo Wen's heavy body. Here's where the most advanced feature came into play. The elytra housed an enormous amount of ultra-microscopic pyramid structures. When the wings vibrated at high speed, these structures emitted magnetic particle longitudinal waves. The directional waves created a polarized magnetic particle phenomenon, which in turn generated an anti-gravity field effect. Simply put, it was anti-gravity. The elytra's unique structure allowed Luo Wen to partially negate gravity, enabling his lightweight wings to lift his bulky body into the air. However, this system wasn't omnipotent. Otherwise, Luo Wen wouldn't have been so dissatisfied with his flight speed. Improving his speed was straightforward in theory. Permanently alter his body structure, shedding parts of his exoskeleton and protective layers to reduce weight. Reshaping his rotund body into an aerodynamic form would also enhance his speed. Such modifications were entirely possible with his newfound ability to choose genetic segments to transform himself, a talent awakened after his prolonged hibernation. With sufficient energy, a single session of cocooned metamorphosis could achieve these changes. Yet after careful consideration, Luo Wen decided against it for now. The jungle terrain was treacherous, and his delicate membranous wings couldn't withstand much abuse. Above the treetops, the domain of the pterosaurs, Luo Wen was utterly outclassed in both size and numbers. All things considered, faster flight offered little advantage in his current situation. Thus, when forced to choose between speed and defense, he opted for defense. C-104. The long-faced beast. The novelty of having wings soon wore off, and Luo Wen's initial excitement cooled as rationality reclaimed its position. His plans for soaring the skies were temporarily shelved. The top priority now was nurturing the brood nest and rebuilding the structure of the swarm. Over the next few days, nothing noteworthy occurred except for the daily loss of varying numbers of ultra-giant soldier ants from the big-headed ants. The underground temporary base was completed yesterday. In addition to personal chambers for Luo Wen and the brood nest, it also included facilities like a hatchery and storage rooms, along with as many as 5 escape tunnels. After several days of recovery, the brood nest had also largely regained its functionality. Luo Wen immediately issued a production order for the first batch, 50 fully grown worker ants. This method of production consumed a tremendous amount of energy. Fortunately, worker ants were relatively small compared to the current size of the brood nest, so there was no repeat of the situation from before when the queen ant produced big black and became debilitated for over a week. Within half a day, 50 worker ants were ready. Next, Luo Wen issued a daily order for 10,000 eggs, which would eventually hatch into worker ants, burrower ants, and spy bugs. There was no need to produce combat units at this stage of the swarm's development. Current resources simply couldn't support them. For now, the focus was on replenishing labor and steadily growing. The base gradually came into operation. Luo Wen personally handled the hunting tasks outside. With the nearby granary available, the risks were minimal. The base saw an increase of 10,000 eggs daily, and as they began hatching, the 50 worker ants struggled to manage them. The brood nest paused egg production to prioritize a week of producing adult worker ants. The addition of hundreds of worker ants, though insufficient to meet the needs of the hatchery, provided some relief for now. Thanks to several rounds of genetic optimization, the worker ants' growth speed was significantly faster. If this pace could be maintained for a dozen more days, the first batch of insect pupae would hatch, alleviating the labor shortage. In the meantime, the larvae were fed less frequently, but a little hunger wouldn't harm them. It was manageable. On this day, as Luo Wen emerged from his burrow to hunt, he noticed faint tremors from the ground. Unlike the distant earth-shaking vibrations from earlier days, these were lighter, indicating the source was smaller in size and relatively close. The dense jungle vegetation obstructed visibility, making it difficult to see far. Luo Wen cautiously activated optical camouflage and climbed a nearby tree trunk to gain a height advantage for observing the source of the disturbance. However, the view from above was also limited. Unfurling his membranous wings from beneath the elytra, Luo Wen pushed off the tree trunk with his legs while spreading his wings. By flapping lightly, he glided silently to another nearby trunk. This wasn't true flight but a quiet gliding technique Luo Wen had recently discovered. While daydreaming in the treetops, he observed a creature far off in a taller tree. It had wing-like membranes under its arms, and despite its small size, it leapt from a height, spread its limbs, and glided out of sight. From a distance, it seemed like some type of frog or lizard. Inspired, Luo Wen practiced this method repeatedly. Though his equipment was far from specialized, his membranous wings could suffice in a pinch. Because of his weight, his gliding range was short, only effective for traveling between nearby trunks with the aid of jumps. While limited, this method provided a safe way to navigate situations like the current one. After gliding around 20 meters, Luo Wen was surprised to discover that the unknown creature was heading straight for his position. Remaining motionless, he soon got a clear look at the intruder. It was a creature resembling a dog, but with an unusually elongated head that gave it a sinister appearance. Standing over a meter tall and nearly 3 meters long including its tail, it had short, sturdy limbs ending in three-toed, muscular paws. Its body was covered in coarse, grayish-brown bristle-like fur without any exoskeleton armor. The long-faced beast approached the tree beneath Luo Wen, sniffing the ground with its elongated snout, seemingly searching for something. Carefully tracking it from tree to tree, Luo Wen observed the beast's behavior. Its larger size and unknown abilities made it unwise to act recklessly. The long-faced beast gradually closed in on the big-headed ant's leaf-cutting convoy. It seemed to identify its target and joyfully bounded toward the ants. As it neared, a half-meter long, agile tongue shot out from its mouth. The tongue struck a medium soldier ant, rolled it up in sticky saliva, and pulled it into the beast's mouth. After chewing a few times, the ant disappeared into its stomach. Luo Wen was taken aback. Who would have thought this dog-like creature had mastered the skills of a frog? Then, Luo Wen felt a surge of irritation. The big-headed ant's nest near his base was already considered his personal granary. This beast was stealing food right under his nose. Clearly an experienced predator of big-headed ants, the long-faced beast maintained an optimal distance, using its tongue to snatch one worker ant or soldier ant after another. Despite their once dominant position, the big-headed ants were oblivious to the attacks. Their vulnerabilities were glaring and easy to exploit. After observing for a while, Luo Wen deduced that the long-faced beast had no other notable skills beyond its tongue. This made sense. If it were more capable, it wouldn't be stuck preying on ants. Moreover, the beast avoided giant soldier ants and ultra-giant soldier ants entirely, keeping a safe distance from them. Luo Wen formulated his plan. A creature with such weak combat capabilities dared to steal his food. While the long-faced beast was enjoying its meal, it suddenly felt a heavy weight on its back, nearly forcing it to the ground. As it struggled, a sharp pain shot through the back of its neck, followed by the weight lifting abruptly. Luo Wen had made his move. The beast's eyes, located on the sides of its head, left its upper side a blind spot. Using gliding and optical camouflage, Luo Wen landed silently on its back. Before the beast could react, Luo Wen's venomous fangs pierced its neck. Beneath its bristly fur, its relatively tough skin offered little defense compared to exoskeleton armor, allowing the fangs to penetrate easily. After injecting venom, Luo Wen swiftly retreated to a nearby tree trunk. Death was now inevitable for the poisoned beast, and Luo Wen saw no need for further confrontation. He would simply wait and let time do the work. C-105. The swarm network awakens. The pain of muscles being gradually dissolved drove the long-faced beast into madness. It could no longer hide and began fleeing in all directions. Unfortunately, the danger stemmed from within its body. Its frantic escape not only failed to alleviate the situation but hastened the venom's spread. In mere moments, though its bones still fiercely resisted the venom's invasion, a large portion of its muscles had already dissolved, leaving it unable to support its heavy body. The long-faced beast staggered forward a few more steps before collapsing with a thunderous crash, flattening a patch of wild grass. Lying on the ground, the long-faced beast convulsed continuously for over 10 minutes before finally falling still. After waiting for a while longer, Luo Wen leapt down from the tree trunk and cautiously approached his prey. Seeing the lifeless and vacant eyes of the long-faced beast, he knew it was truly dead. In truth, although the venom Luo Wen injected was highly toxic, given the size of the long-faced beast, it could only dissolve about half its muscle tissue. However, Luo Wen had chosen his target well. The area around the back of the neck was dense with central nerves, serving as the sole connection between the brain and the body. With the muscles and nerve tissue in this area destroyed, even if the beast were alive, it would lose its ability to move and become an easy target. After confirming that the prey was no longer a threat, Luo Wen stepped forward and began consuming the dissolved meat juices to fill his stomach. But soon, he found himself at a bit of a loss. The long-faced beast measured 3 meters in length. Although its elongated head and tail accounted for much of its length, its main body was still about 2 meters, with 4 stout legs adding significant bulk. Even after Luo Wen consumed a portion, more than 200 kilograms of meat remained. In the past, such a quantity of food would have been quickly processed by the swarm. But now, digestion was no longer the issue, even storage posed a challenge. The commotion caused by the long-faced beast's frenzy had already alerted the big-headed ants. Some scouts were already following the trail to investigate. This place was no longer safe, so Luo Wen decided to retreat first. He scattered some pheromones around to create confusion, then hoisted the long-faced beast onto his back and left swiftly. Although the long-faced beast's size and weight dwarfed Luo Wen's own, his exoskeletal armor made moving this load manageable. After all, ants with similar exoskeletons could carry hundreds of times their body weight. When Luo Wen was about a dozen meters away from the base, he stopped. The entrance to the cave was too narrow to accommodate the entire long-faced beast in its current state. Widening it would take time, but cutting the beast into smaller pieces would release a significant amount of blood scent. In this primeval jungle, the smell of blood was akin to an invitation to a feast, and the locals were far from civilized, often displaying extreme savagery in food fights. Yet abandoning such a hard-earned meal was out of the question for Luo Wen. After thinking for a long time, Luo Wen finally came up with a decent plan, though its execution felt a bit undignified. He first found a spot downwind near the base. Dragging the long-faced beast there, he buried it under soil and decaying leaves. Finally, he raised his abdomen and launched a Gatling-style barrage, spraying projectiles in all directions. The primary purpose of this attack was not its highly corrosive and high-temperature effects but its secondary property. An unbearable stench spread, masking the scent of the long-faced beast's wounds and effectively repelling other predators. Moreover, the odor had a shelf life of over half a month. Luo Wen could easily finish consuming the beast in far less time. After satisfying his hunger, Luo Wen hunted 2 ultra-giant soldier ants and ended his day's hunt early, returning to the base. He divided the ultra-giants between the brood nest, worker ants, and larvae, then lay down on one side, bored, watching the bustling hatchery. As he stared absent-mindedly at a worker ant, the mysterious energy mass in his mind suddenly became active. Immediately, Luo Wen's perspective shifted as if his soul had traversed dimensions. Before his eyes appeared a hungry larva with its mouth wide open, waiting to be fed. The sudden change startled him, breaking the connection and returning his consciousness to his body, restoring his normal vision. He realized he had been watching a worker ant feeding that very larva, a larva that now seemed oddly familiar. Luo Wen shivered as if a switch had been flipped. A talent was awakened, and in an instant, he understood everything. The mysterious purple-white energy in his mind boiled and churned. Each insect in the hatchery lit up like a node in his consciousness, forming an unseen network that linked them all together as one. With a single thought, Luo Wen activated a node, and his perspective instantly shifted without any delay. A set of menacing mandibles, dripping with saliva and food mixture, loomed large in his vision. Startled, Luo Wen disconnected from the node and switched to another, a worker ant transporting eggs. His consciousness descending had no effect on its actions, it continued working. With another thought, Luo Wen increased the energy output, causing the worker ant to freeze momentarily. It seemed to become self-aware, performing strange actions like raising its limbs and even putting down the egg to crawl around the hatchery in circles. Gradually, other insects in the hatchery began exhibiting strange behaviors. At first, it was 1 or 2. Eventually, it escalated into a collective phenomenon. Luo Wen was exhilarated. Was this the legendary swarm instant communication system? When the swarm's territory expanded, Luo Wen had constantly struggled with communication issues but could never find a good solution. Finally, after the swarm reached a certain scale, linking with the brood nest had provided him with some vague information, a potential breakthrough for solving communication problems. After extensive development, the swarm met the necessary criteria, leading to the grand sacrifice of countless insects in a long slumber that followed. Upon awakening, Luo Wen found the mysterious energy in his mind but had yet to unlock its true purpose, until now. The immense joy Luo Wen felt after testing the system was indescribable. He had never imagined that this breakthrough would result in such an advanced communication system. No wonder it required such intricate procedures and prolonged preparation. From his tests, Luo Wen mastered some functionalities of the system. He could transfer his consciousness into any insect, seamlessly switch perspectives, and even take control of their bodies with enhanced energy output. The control was precise, without any lag. With increased energy output, he could command entire regions of insects simultaneously. However, as he had not yet mastered multitasking, controlling numerous insects individually for complex tasks remained impractical. For now, this feature was somewhat underutilized. C-106. Under the swarm network. In truth, opportunities to use this feature were practically non-existent. During subsequent tests, Luo Wen discovered that when his consciousness descended upon a particular insect, he could emit a special kind of wave through its body. Insects receiving this wave would naturally follow his commands, eliminating the need to take direct control of their bodies. This meant that in future wars, Luo Wen wouldn't need to personally step onto the battlefield. He could remain safely in the rear and conduct remote operations. However, Luo Wen also identified a flaw in the system. The insects lacked names and were displayed as mere nodes within his mental space. Currently, with the insect population still sparse, this wasn't a major issue. But if the swarm ever regained its former scale of trillions, imagine the chaos of so many nodes flooding his mind. Distinguishing them would become an enormous challenge. After repeated experimentation, Luo Wen devised a temporary solution to this flaw. He could group these nodes in his mind and recreate a sandbox map based on the real-world terrain. The insects would then be arranged and organized according to their actual positions. Moreover, Luo Wen found that he didn't always need to click on nodes in his mind to switch perspectives. He could now seamlessly leap between insects within his line of sight. For instance, if he had possessed this system earlier and wanted to contact the Northern Army, he could first descend upon any insect in their ranks, then leap between countless others until he found the desired perspective or insect. Although somewhat cumbersome, this method solved the problem, considering the transitions were instantaneous. Additionally, since this was an instant communication system, it should have some interactive features. Luo Wen believed the insects should be able to call him actively, rather than him descending upon them unilaterally. However, the swarm had only recently begun to recover, and the current insects were mostly low-intelligence workers, incapable of such complex operations. Testing whether this function existed would have to wait for the emergence of a Type 1 queen ant. The system was incredibly powerful and had even evolved additional features over time, far surpassing the scope of a mere instant communication system. Luo Wen named it the Swarm Network, signifying an invisible web linking the entire swarm together. While the swarm network didn't directly enhance the swarm's numbers, a critical form of strength, it invisibly boosted their overall capabilities, raising the swarm's competitive edge by several levels. What other functions it possessed remained unknown due to the current limitations. Only through continuous development could they be uncovered. But even its currently displayed capabilities elevated Luo Wen's vision to new heights. Perhaps the swarm's future was boundless. Over the next few days, Luo Wen spent his time bringing back a few ultra-giant soldier ants to the nest daily and using venom to dissolve parts of long-faced beasts to treat himself to private meals. He also ambushed passing birds and insects to satisfy his cravings. 10 or so days later, the chirping of insects and birds around him noticeably dwindled. The area had become a forbidden zone for them. Meanwhile, the long-faced beasts had been completely consumed. Fortunately, during this time, the first batches of insects had begun to emerge from their cocoons. Under Luo Wen's orders, the burrower ants dug tunnels while the spy bugs provided cover. Within half a day, they had completed a tunnel connecting to the big-headed ant nest's lower levels. This rapid completion was due to two factors. Luo Wen had originally chosen a base location close to the big-headed ant nest. The second reason was the swarm network, which allowed him to command the troops in real time, even directly taking control of certain insects for precise operations. Since Luo Wen's body had grown larger, he no longer personally supervised the digging. The burrower ants, with their limited intelligence, often failed to fully understand his instructions, leading to imperfect results. The arrival of the queen ant improved the situation somewhat, but it still fell short of Luo Wen's standards. Now, with the swarm network's help, Luo Wen returned to the front lines of excavation, personally guiding the work. The resulting tunnels felt significantly smoother. Once the tunnel connecting to the big-headed ant nest was completed, the burrower ants withdrew, and swarms of spy bugs moved in. Approximately 10,000 spy bugs were divided into several small teams, infiltrating the big-headed ant nest in sequence. During the excavation, Luo Wen noticed that while these basic units weren't very intelligent, they had strong learning and imitation abilities. Many tasks only required him to demonstrate once for them to replicate with impressive accuracy. This infiltration operation was somewhat complex. After entering the big-headed ant nest, the spy bugs needed to create localized numerical advantages and steadily devour the big-headed ant's living forces. If it were just about stealing food or targeting a specific objective, such simple commands could be executed well. But they likely couldn't grasp the concept of creating localized numerical superiority. Fortunately, Luo Wen could now provide live demonstrations. Inside the nest, the familiar spiral structures greeted him, with plantations dotting the tunnels. After sealing off the entrance with misleading pheromones to temporarily obscure their presence, the spy bugs approached their targets under Luo Wen's command. These specialists in infiltration and assassination were particularly devious poison insects. Given their numerical advantage, eliminating the unguarded worker ants felt almost overkill. As Luo Wen had expected, the spy bugs completed the task flawlessly, with 0 casualties. After eliminating the worker ants in the room, some worker ants from the swarm were escorted in by the spy bugs to take over the plantation. The enemy worker ants' corpses and the matured fungal crops were transported back to the swarm's base for daily needs. Starting from remote plantation rooms, the swarm steadily devoured the big-headed ant's underground territory. The big-headed ant nest had never encountered such tactics and was woefully unprepared in defense. Occasionally, passing worker or soldier ants might brush against spy bugs, exchanging pheromones in a friendly manner. But if they wandered into the occupied plantations out of curiosity, they would swiftly become lifeless resources transported back to the swarm base. If this scenario were filmed as a human movie, it would resemble an underground base where colleagues were continuously replaced by unknown entities, all while the base remained oblivious, a chilling thought. C-107. Flying insects. After observing for 2 days to ensure the insects were thoroughly familiar with their tasks, Luo Wen finally freed himself from the duties of hunting food and feeding larvae. By occupying existing plantations and eliminating big-headed ants, the swarm base could now meet its daily needs. Luo Wen only needed to feed himself. The long-faced beasts had been consumed, and the ultra-giant soldier ants of the big-headed ants had nearly been hunted to extinction after days of relentless attacks. As for other big-headed ant soldiers, their smaller size made them unsatisfying to eat, so Luo Wen left them to the swarm to slowly consume and digest. Luo Wen decided to explore the nearby area, hoping to find another long-faced beast. That would resolve his food supply for many days. At first, he didn't dare venture too far from the base, worried that the insects might slip up and attract the big-headed ants to retaliate against the base. He frequently used the swarm network to monitor the situation. Surprisingly, everything progressed smoothly. Every day, around 10,000 adult insects emerged from their cocoons, and the number of infiltrators inside the big-headed ant nest steadily increased. The swarm had even taken control of plantation rooms near the connecting tunnel, securing the passage and virtually eliminating the risk of exposure. With fewer concerns, Luo Wen expanded his exploration range over the next few days, eventually even staying out overnight. Although he didn't encounter another long-faced beast, his increasingly skilled hunting techniques and the abundance of small creatures in the jungle ensured he could still fill his stomach. About 2 or 3 kilometers northwest of the base, Luo Wen discovered a mountain hollow filled with unusual green-leafed vegetation. The trees, averaging over 30 meters tall, had thick trunks and bore numerous red-skinned, ping-pong ball-sized fruits. Small, peculiar creatures lived in the trees. These animals, 20 to 30 centimeters long, had round heads, large eyes, fur-covered bodies, short limbs, sharp claws, and slender tails tipped with short fur. The creatures fed on the red-skinned fruits and moved nimbly among the interconnecting branches beneath the canopy, rarely descending to the ground. Since the small birds sharing their ecological niche posed little threat, they faced few natural predators and existed in large numbers. Their low vigilance made them relatively easy prey. Despite their small size, these creatures were plump, with a fair amount of meat that tasted quite good. When Luo Wen first explored the area, it didn't take him long to eat his fill. After digesting for a while, he decided not to linger and marked the area heavily before leaving. He planned to return whenever he needed more food. In addition to these small creatures, Luo Wen discovered other interesting species, one of which particularly caught his attention. It was a flying insect resembling an ant but much larger, measuring around 6 to 7 centimeters in length. Its slender, streamlined body was yellow-brown with black circular markings. A pair of thin, transparent wings extended from its back, and its tail ended in a sharp, black stinger. The insect's head was flat and rounded, with a sleek, mechanical aesthetic. However, only its head was armored, with a small dorsal plate covering the muscles around its wing base. The rest of its body lacked exoskeletal protection. This was understandable, as these were specialized aerial combat units, fundamentally different from Luo Wen's improvised adaptations. Although they lacked exoskeletal protection, their flight speed was impressive. They moved in large swarms numbering in the thousands. When the yellow insects vibrated their wings en masse, the resulting buzzing sound was loud, reminiscent of old fighter planes. Luo Wen first encountered these flying insects while feasting in the red fruit forest. He had heard the sound from a distance and was puzzled, but the small creatures, apparently familiar with the noise, quickly hid in tree holes. What had been a lively forest moments ago was suddenly silent, save for the insect's deafening buzz. Realizing the situation, Luo Wen chose not to provoke trouble. He abandoned his meal, concealed himself among the treetops, and observed the swarm. The flying insects passed below like a squadron of fighter planes, undeterred by any other creatures. Their brazen display suggested either recklessness or genuine confidence, likely the latter. At the very least, their thunderous presence was intimidating. Luo Wen envied their flight capabilities. Unfortunately, his lack of prior knowledge left him too far to intercept any. The air fleet flew quickly, vanishing into the jungle. Before he could react, he wasn't overly disappointed, as their wings didn't seem suited for long-distance flight. Their nest was likely nearby, and he was determined to find them again. In another part of the jungle, Luo Wen stumbled upon a group of small green dinosaurs. He wasn't surprised, given his previous experience as a pterosaur food experience card. These dinosaurs, resembling velociraptors from movies, numbered over 10. They had long heads filled with uneven, sharp teeth, likely indicating dental problems. Their large, watery eyes on the sides of their heads made them look quite alert. Their forelimbs were short and their hind limbs thick and powerful, each equipped with 3 curved, razor-sharp claws. They walked upright on 2 legs and had long, flexible tails that enhanced their agility and speed. Unlike velociraptors, these dinosaurs had colorful feathers running from their elbows to their armpits. While incapable of flight, these feathers helped them steer during high-speed sprints. In such moments, they resembled oversized chickens. Standing less than half a meter tall and measuring 1.5 meters in length, their green, white patterned skin appeared rough and lacked armor, suggesting poor defense. Luo Wen encountered them while they were chasing prey. Their commotion and duck-like calls drew his attention. Their loud, careless cries made it clear they weren't apex predators, certainly not as awe-inspiring as the air fleet of flying insects. Despite their speed, the jungle's complex terrain forced them to constantly navigate obstacles, wasting time. Their agility couldn't compare to the flying insects, who left Luo Wen far behind. Gliding between tree trunks, Luo Wen easily caught up with the small dinosaurs. C-108. Aiding the weak. Luo Wen managed to catch up with the small dinosaurs so quickly not only because the shortest path between 2 points is a straight line but also because the dinosaurs had stopped moving. From a distance, Luo Wen saw them crowding around the entrance of a burrow at the base of a small hill, shouting at the top of their lungs. It was as if they were trying to attract a more powerful predator, a level of recklessness that surpassed even Luo Wen's. The burrow, originally concealed by natural coverings, had been trampled into disrepair, leaving the entrance exposed. Although the opening wasn't large, the slender-bodied dinosaurs could probably force their way in with some effort. However, their physique wasn't suited for underground combat, and entering the burrow would likely lead to a grim fate. The dinosaurs, seemingly experienced, clearly understood this. Instead of attacking, they surrounded the burrow and used their incessant shouting to intimidate the creatures inside. Occasionally, they would tilt their heads and cock their ears, as if searching for something. Luo Wen, observing from above, couldn't see what kind of creature was hiding in the burrow. Judging by the fact that it dared not return home while the dinosaurs waited, it was likely weak and not worth much attention. The grating calls of the dinosaurs were giving Luo Wen a headache. Concerned about attracting other, stronger predators and eager to silence the commotion, Luo Wen decided to intervene. First, he circled the area to ensure no ambush predators were lying in wait to take advantage of the situation. Returning to the top of the hill, he sought a suitable target. Although Luo Wen lacked formal training in biology, his field experience had taught him some basic patterns. These swift, sharp-toothed dinosaurs were unlikely to be venomous. Despite their numbers, Luo Wen wasn't afraid of them, thanks to his armored body. Moreover, he had no intention of engaging them head-on. As a flying, venomous, stealth-capable assassin, ambush tactics suited him far better. The positioning of the dinosaurs' sensory organs meant they had to tilt their heads upward to see above. Having honed his skills in hiding and ambushing through countless hours of battle royale games, Luo Wen considered this an easy operation. Just as he locked onto his target and began gliding down, the nearby grass suddenly rustled, as if something had bolted from the undergrowth. The dinosaurs, only slightly slower to notice than Luo Wen, immediately reacted to the disturbance. While a few stayed behind to guard the burrow, the rest charged toward the moving grass. Curious about what had happened and interested in studying the dinosaurs' combat tactics, just in case they turned out to be venomous, Luo Wen quietly adjusted his trajectory mid-flight. His silent wingbeats allowed him to veer off course without alerting the guarding dinosaurs. From his new vantage point, Luo Wen saw multiple creatures emerging from the burrow, 5 mammals, to be exact. Cornered by the dinosaurs, the mammals bared their teeth and growled lowly, trying to intimidate their attackers. But the dinosaurs, having pursued them this far, weren't about to back down. One dinosaur let out a series of calls, summoning its companions guarding the burrow. The mammals were much smaller than the dinosaurs, standing about 30 centimeters tall at the shoulder. Including their extraordinarily long tails, they were roughly the same length as the dinosaurs, about 1.5 meters. Their bodies were covered in dense, short black fur with softer white fur on their bellies. Their paws resembled small human hands, similar to oversized rats. Their round, black eyes radiated fear, clearly marking them as creatures with weak combat abilities. Outnumbered and outsized, the mammals quickly fell to the dinosaurs' coordinated attack, despite their frantic resistance. Luo Wen, witnessing the bullying of the weak, felt compelled to intervene. One dinosaur, busy tearing into its prey, suddenly felt a sharp pain in its neck. When it turned to investigate, it saw nothing. Confused, it endured the pain until it became unbearable, letting out a cry of agony. The other dinosaurs looked at their comrade in confusion. Unable to identify the cause of the distress, they resumed feeding. But soon, another dinosaur cried out in pain, collapsing to the ground and writhing. Their eerie, discordant cries unsettled the remaining dinosaurs. Though they scanned their surroundings, they found nothing amiss. Still, they lowered their heads cautiously, a flicker of fear in their eyes. Even so, another dinosaur succumbed to the same mysterious pain shortly after. The first dinosaur, now paralyzed, had stopped moving entirely, and its cries were fading. This unexplained phenomenon filled the remaining dinosaurs with terror. Reluctant to abandon their prey, they hesitated until one finally fled. The rest soon followed. Luo Wen didn't pursue them. For one, the available food was already more than sufficient. Moreover, he was running low on venom. His venom glands were small, and he had used an extra strong dose on the first dinosaur to ensure a quick kill. Without venom, his combat effectiveness was significantly reduced. Letting the dinosaurs go would keep the meat fresh, and they could always be dealt with later. The scene left 3 dinosaurs' bodies and the 5 mammalian victims, now lifeless after the attack. Despite their rough appearance, they were usable as food. Luo Wen dragged the dinosaur carcasses into the burrow one by one. Their bodies, free from significant wounds or the scent of blood, would remain fresh for a long time. The mammalian bodies, however, reeked of blood and had to be dealt with immediately. Luo Wen carefully salvaged usable meat, wrapped it in fur, and used his Gatling ability to spray the area with a pungent scent. The stench not only masked the smell of blood but also deterred scavengers, making the burrow a safer food storage site. Eating raw meat no longer troubled Luo Wen. In fact, the mammalian meat tasted far better than insect meat. Interestingly, the mammals had a special organ near the base of their tails, where they stored excess fat. This adaptation kept them agile while allowing them to reserve energy. Luo Wen named the fat tail lard, dubbing the creatures tail lard rats. C-109. Encountering the flying insects again. 1. For the next 2 days, Luo Wen stayed in the vicinity. With no food concerns and hopes of finding the nests of the small dinosaurs or flying insects, he scouted the area thoroughly. Unfortunately, their hunting ranges were vast, and Luo Wen failed to encounter them again during this time. Among the new genetic material he acquired, only the tail fat organ stood out. Luo Wen chose not to integrate the other traits into his body. Currently, Luo Wen was already a versatile predator capable of operations on land, sea, air, and underground. His battle-hardened system of stealth and assassination was incredibly effective, and he saw no need to dilute it unless the new abilities were particularly powerful or useful. The tail fat organ, despite its unassuming appearance and amusing name, proved to be immensely practical. It allowed Luo Wen to convert excess energy into compact fat deposits for storage, greatly enhancing his endurance in sustained combat. What would have been a week-long supply of food from the 5-tail lard rats and 3 small dinosaurs had been consumed in just 2 days, with the surplus energy compactly stored. Luo Wen estimated he could now go up to 2 months without eating, provided he rationed the energy. If this ability were distributed to the entire swarm, it could significantly alleviate logistical pressures. With food taken care of, Luo Wen no longer had any reason to remain in the area. He set off once more on his adventurous journey. Every day, Luo Wen remotely checked the situation at the base multiple times. Under his command, everything ran smoothly. The swarm's numbers had surpassed 200,000, and they had quietly taken over the bottom 10 levels of the big-headed ant nest. The 10 Type 3 queen ants were now in cocoons, nearing maturity. In addition, 50 more Type 3 queen ant eggs awaited hatching. The swarm was currently grappling with a severe population shortage, a situation Luo Wen, once a land-dwelling apex predator, found difficult to adjust to. Strengthening the reproductive capabilities of the Type 3 queen ants was the best solution for this issue. Once these Type 3 queen ants matured, the swarm's numbers would explode. Luo Wen was confident that once they overcame this vulnerable period, the swarm would soon dominate the continent again. Over the next 10 days, Luo Wen thoroughly explored the 5-kilometer radius around the base. Combining his observations from the air during previous encounters, he gained a comprehensive understanding of the area. He found himself on the edge of a primeval forest, where the vegetation grew denser and more complex the deeper one ventured. Massive trees blocked out the sunlight, their thick canopies intertwined with vines. Even at midday, the forest floor remained dim and eerie. The forest teemed with a variety of small and medium-sized creatures, forming a tightly interwoven ecosystem. Luo Wen encountered many strange species here, such as a giant patterned spider the size of a millstone. It had spun a massive web between 2 trees, preying on flying insects, small birds, and bats. He also saw snakes of various sizes and colors. The smaller ones hunted birds and rodents far smaller than the tail lard rats, while the larger ones preyed on the tail lard rats themselves. The tail lard rats, relatively numerous here, occupied the bottom rung of the food chain, subsisting on insects. Luo Wen even saw them ambush scout worker ants from the big-headed ant nest. Something about that seemed off, though Luo Wen couldn't put his finger on it. Smaller creatures were even less picky eaters, their diets determined solely by hunger. Luo Wen discovered a small river and, above its murky surface, spotted super dragonflies with wingspans exceeding 1 meter. However, he refrained from entering the river. The water's opacity hid potential dangers, and as the swarm's supreme leader, Luo Wen couldn't afford unnecessary risks. The local fauna was surprisingly hospitable, generously showcasing their talents and donating genetic material to Luo Wen's collection. He gained abilities like heat detection, echolocation, and web spinning, among others. Additionally, his frequent consumption of birds led to a mutation in his ocular photoreceptors, dramatically enhancing his vision range. While this change wasn't immediately noticeable in the dense forest, Luo Wen realized its impact one night when he climbed above the canopy to enjoy the breeze. From his vantage point, he could directly see the twin moons in the night sky without relying on light detection. One was pale yellow, the other faint white, both exuding a cool, noble glow that left Luo Wen momentarily entranced. Among his discoveries, Luo Wen finally located the nest of the flying insects. Thanks to his newly acquired echolocation system, he detected their flight squadron from afar. His new ability caused hidden ear holes to form on the sides of his head plate. Luo Wen could emit ultrasonic waves at frequencies near 100 kHz and use the echoes to determine the size and position of surrounding objects without relying on sight. Though the small size of his ear holes limited the skill's effectiveness compared to that of a bat, it still significantly enhanced his auditory system. Previously, Luo Wen had to rely on his antennae and leg hairs to sense sound. During his first encounter with the flying insects, Luo Wen had been unprepared. Their speed, combined with the dense forest and poor visibility, caused him to lose track of them. This time, sound alone allowed him to trail them effortlessly. Hanging from a sturdy tree trunk, the giant hive of the flying insects loomed ahead. Its yellow-brown surface, made of unknown materials, stood over 5 meters tall and 2 meters wide. If not for the tree's considerable girth, smaller vegetation wouldn't have been able to support its weight. A circular entrance atop the hive bustled with activity as flying insects darted in and out. Around the hive, numerous guard insects patrolled the air. Luo Wen had no plans to attack the hive, he only needed to capture a single flying insect. However, these creatures always traveled in groups, so careful planning was essential. As a squadron of around 2,000 flying insects arrogantly skimmed the forest floor, they remained oblivious to the predator lurking on a nearby tree trunk, waiting for his moment. The main formation passed, leaving one straggler trailing behind. Just as the last flying insect approached, a sharp lance shot out from the tree trunk, piercing it cleanly. The insect emitted a strange sound as it died, alerting the rest of the squadron. Luo Wen quickly stuffed the insect, shell and all, into his mouth, then froze in place, hoping to avoid detection. Unfortunately, his optical camouflage seemed ineffective against the flying insects. Without hesitation, the squadron wheeled around in unison and charged straight at him. C-110. Encountering the flying bugs again too. Luo Wen finally understood why the chameleon bug from before had been surrounded and immobilized. It was just like his current situation, encircled by flying bugs, debating whether they had noticed him or if he should make a run for it or stay still. The deliberation didn't last long. The flying bugs launched their attack. Dozens of flying bugs dived at him. As they closed in, their wings spread wide, and their posture instantly shifted. They switched from head-first dives to rear-first thrusts, exposing the stingers at their tails. They were so fast that, despite Luo Wen's reaction, he couldn't completely avoid the attack. Fortunately, his exoskeletal armor wasn't just for show. The tiny stingers couldn't even leave a scratch on his back plates. Luo Wen didn't feel the least bit smug about it. He had seen countless times how the red ants dealt with ultras, and these flying bugs resembled winged ants. Who knew if they might employ similar tactics? Propelling himself with his legs, Luo Wen leapt from the tree and dashed off in a random direction. He didn't choose to fly because his flight speed was far inferior to these bugs designed for aerial maneuvers. Moreover, for him to fly, he would have to expose his wing covers, his back armor, leaving his more vulnerable abdomen exposed. That would be akin to disabling his own defenses. His legs, refined through numerous evolutions, weren't just capable of impressive running but also excellent jumping and clinging abilities. In the obstacle-filled terrain, his movements were like a parkour performance, fluid, efficient, and even visually pleasing. However, to the flying bugs with straight-line flight and high-altitude vision advantages, his acrobatics seemed overly flashy. Oddly enough, Luo Wen had maintained his optical invisibility, yet the flying bugs pursued him with GPS-like precision, always managing to locate and attack him accurately. Luo Wen raised his pincers above and behind his head, shielding his eyes while ensuring his body didn't lean too far forward during his sprint, which could affect his speed. Unfortunately, the slight speed boost was insignificant to the flying bugs. The attacks remained relentless. While most were deflected by his armor, a few bugs managed to latch onto the crevices of his armor and clamber onto his body. Luo Wen couldn't afford to let them linger. Although he was also adept at poisoning, he preferred direct confrontations and despised opponents who used toxins. While running, his legs had to reinforce his back's defense. His reverse-jointed limbs worked to dislodge the flying bugs, significantly impacting his speed. Luo Wen had always thought his 10 limbs, 2 pincers, 2 swimming legs, and 6 standard legs, were sufficient to handle most situations. Now, facing one of those rare exceptions, he wished he had 6 more legs to fend off the airborne attacks. At this rate, it was a slow death. In a simple marathon, he could exhaust these bugs behind him, thanks to the energy reserves in his tail lard. But this was an unpredictable primeval jungle, with who knew how many hidden predators lying in wait. He didn't dare drag the flying bugs along for a marathon here, he had to come up with a solution. First, he needed to figure out how they were tracking him. His optical invisibility was useless. He released deceptive pheromones, but they had no effect. He wasn't surprised, as this tracking method only worked at close range, and he had just been testing it. Suddenly, he noticed faint yellow, granular powder on his back armor. The powder seemed to come from the base of the flying bug's hind legs and abdomen, which were covered in fine hairs. Was it pollen? Could they be tracking him using this pollen? Luo Wen's eyes darted around, and sure enough, he spotted traces of the powder on the tip of the leg he had used to attack the first flying bug. Although he didn't know exactly how the bugs tracked the pollen, since there were plenty of flowers and pollen around, yet they hadn't lost him, it was likely a unique ability. After determining the cause, Luo Wen's first guess was sent. Mid-run, he abruptly opened his wing covers, lifted his abdomen, and fired off a series of Gatling shots with a PFFT, PFFT, PFFT sound. When the barrage ended, he immediately closed his wing covers. In ground combat, his Gatling method had always worked wonders at close range. But in an aerial ground battle, its limited range became a glaring disadvantage. The flying bugs merely heard the sound and saw the spectacle. Luo Wen hadn't intended to kill them outright. Instead, a foul stench accompanied by white smoke enveloped the area. The flying bugs were visibly affected, disoriented and unable to maintain their course. Yet before Luo Wen could celebrate, they climbed higher and resumed the chase. Damn it! Luo Wen cursed under his breath. The stench only covered a small area, rendering it ineffective while he was on the move. Unless he stayed within the affected zone, it was useless. But staying put wouldn't solve the root problem. If the flying bugs had enough patience, he'd become a sitting duck. The risk was too great, making this strategy untenable. Suddenly, he remembered scenes from cartoons where characters escaped similar predicaments by jumping into water. Not far ahead, Luo Wen could hear the sound of flowing water. Though he wasn't sure if the cartoon logic would work, he had no time to hesitate. The river water was murky and potentially dangerous, but compared to his current known peril, the choice wasn't difficult. Changing course, Luo Wen sprinted toward the river. Every few steps, he fired another volley of shots. Though it only temporarily slowed the flying bugs, it prevented them from latching onto him and allowed him to focus on running faster. Minutes later, just as his ammunition was running low, Luo Wen reached the riverbank. Without hesitation, he leapt and dove into the water. With a loud splash, ripples spread across the surface before calmness returned. Sometimes, cartoon knowledge came in handy. The flying bugs, unable to continue their pursuit, hovered over the water, unwilling to give up. But they had underestimated Luo Wen's versatility as an amphibious soldier. With a sly thought to let them keep waiting, Luo Wen's previously unused swimming legs finally got to shine. Silently, he swam along the riverbank, letting the current carry him. Suddenly, fast-moving unidentified objects darted toward him from underwater. Though the murky river limited visibility, his enhanced hearing picked up on the disturbances. His echolocation, derived from bats, worked even underwater. The dense hairs within his ear cavities provided some waterproofing, allowing it to function to a degree. While he couldn't emit ultrasonic waves underwater, the feedback from water currents revealed unnatural movements. The intense sounds of the rushing water made their approach unmistakable. C-111. The strange fish. Using echolocation, Luo Wen determined that the attackers were 4 fish, each approximately 30 centimeters in length. He relaxed slightly. The numbers were small, and their size didn't give them an advantage. Where did they find the courage to challenge him? As the attackers swiftly approached, Luo Wen finally got a clear view of them. They had disproportionately large heads and slender tails. Their bodies were dark gray with crescent-shaped red markings, and their mouths were filled with densely packed, razor-sharp teeth, exuding an oppressive aura. Unfortunately for them, they had encountered the ever-prepared Luo Wen. As one strange fish neared, a massive pincer snapped at it. Though the pincer appeared cumbersome, its speed was lightning fast, creating a trail of whitewater ripples beneath the surface. The strange fish was highly agile, twisting its body to evade the pincer. However, a limb shot out from the shadows, piercing its body from the side. In an instant, red blood began to diffuse through the water. The 3 fish trailing behind caught the scent of blood. Instead of continuing their assault on Luo Wen, they turned on their injured companion, tearing it apart. Within moments, the wounded fish was reduced to shreds, fragments of flesh, scales, and limbs floating in the water. This sudden development left Luo Wen momentarily stunned, and the follow-up attacks he had prepared lost their targets. But what happened next gave him no time for shock. Just seconds after the blood spread, a torrent of abnormal vibrations emanated from the depths of the river. It seemed the blood had disturbed something, and countless vibrations raced toward his location. From the feedback he received, Luo Wen discerned that they were all the same type of strange fish. The small area around him was about to turn into a battlefield. This was an internal conflict among the strange fish, and as an outsider, Luo Wen decided not to get involved. Realizing the 3 remaining fish were no longer interested in him, he quickly swam away. After covering a dozen meters, the water behind him began to boil. Dense, frothy waves surged across the surface. Luo Wen had no interest in looking back. After swimming another 50 meters, he cautiously poked his head out near the riverbank. The commotion behind him expanded rapidly, and Luo Wen's swimming speed was too slow to guarantee his safety for long. If the chaos spread further, he might still get caught in it. Compared to the strange fish with their menacing jaws, the flying bugs now seemed almost endearing. Faced with a choice between regular danger and extreme peril, the decision wasn't difficult. Fortunately, Luo Wen had already gained some distance, and the flying bugs seemed distracted by the turmoil on the water's surface. Moreover, his impromptu bath had washed away most of the pollen particles. Luo Wen slowly climbed ashore, his form gradually blending into his surroundings. Only the hovering water droplets and occasional drips betrayed his movements. But now, no one was paying attention to him. Grateful for the respite, Luo Wen darted into the jungle, disappearing from sight. The environment around him was familiar, traces of his pheromones lingered. He had scouted this area days ago and remembered a burrow of tail-lard rats nearby where he could rest temporarily. As for the tail-lard rats, I'm guessing he ate them. It's not really clear in the source material. The burrow was spacious enough for Luo Wen. The foul stench from before had mostly dissipated over the past few days. His recent exertions had drained a significant amount of his energy, though with his tail-lard organ, such consumption was negligible. Closing his eyes, Luo Wen sank his consciousness into his mind, uploading the newly acquired flying bug genes to the swarm network. This was a feature he had discovered recently. He could back up his genetic data to the network, with only him and the brood nest having download permissions. It was like switching from local storage to cloud storage. This function saved him a lot of trouble. He no longer needed to return to the base each time he acquired new genes to link with the brood nest for sharing. After completing the upload, he began analyzing the flying bug genes. Now that he could actively select his evolutionary traits, he no longer passively accepted every new ability but instead could pick and choose. For instance, from earlier genetic acquisitions, he had only opted for thermal sensing and echolocation, discarding others like web spinning. While web spinning seemed flashy, it required a new gland to be added to his body. Apart from the toxin glands near the base of his teeth, his abdomen already housed the Gatling system. The Gatling system consisted of 2 glands storing different chemical compounds and a reaction chamber, taking up most of his abdominal space. Not to mention the recently added tail-lard organ. Adding a new gland would require reducing his Gatling ammunition capacity, which was impractical. After careful consideration, Luo Wen realized his interest in web spinning was largely influenced by movies. In reality, the ability required extensive preparation and wasn't nearly as miraculous as portrayed. Thus, Luo Wen abandoned it. Many of the abilities he discarded were for similar reasons, like feathers. There was simply no place on his body for such things. As he encountered more species, the diversity of his abilities proved adaptable. However, sometimes having too many abilities wasn't advantageous. Many traits required corresponding structural adaptations. For instance, his ability to fly relied on anti-gravity wing cover technology because his bulky body couldn't achieve flight otherwise. Birds and pterosaurs, by contrast, had streamlined forms optimized for flight. Similarly, his swimming could only be described as not drowning, compared to the speed and agility of fish. Even his echolocation system, derived from bats, fell short. Bats had large ears as receivers, while he had only 2 small ear holes. The performance gap was self-evident. Perhaps the only system in which he surpassed the original was his Gatling mechanism, where his size provided a clear advantage. But that didn't obscure the shortcomings of his multi-trait approach. Despite these thoughts, Luo Wen wasn't about to abandon his multi-talent strategy. It had proven crucial to his adaptability and survival in varied dangers. As the swarm's supreme commander, Luo Wen's primary task was survival. For him, multiple talents were the right choice. However, his musings weren't about himself but about the future of the swarm. Should he develop soldiers with versatile abilities or specialize them for specific tasks? He had begun to feel the limits of his knowledge and intellect. Yet, there wasn't much he could do about it. The queen ant resembled an intelligent AI, capable of receiving commands, but not holding discussions. Fortunately, their current enemies weren't particularly strong. With the swarm's unique abilities and sufficient resources, overcoming them shouldn't be a problem. This thought circled briefly in Luo Wen's mind before he set it aside. C112. Diplodocus and Leopard. The new flying bug genes weren't particularly useful for Luo Wen himself. However, their template made them suitable for mass production, potentially filling the gap in the swarm's aerial forces. Perhaps soon, the first tree-based sub-base of the swarm would be officially established. Still, some revelations in the genetic data caught Luo Wen by surprise. The flying bugs had indeed tracked him using pollen, but not through scent. Instead, the pollen, mixed with saliva, created a unique refractive effect. This allowed the flying bugs to accurately pinpoint him even amidst dense vegetation and blooming flowers. In hindsight, the Gatling smoke barrage wasn't effective because of its smell but because the rising white smoke obstructed their vision. It was a lucky accident. Without understanding this mechanism, relying solely on scent to counter them in the future might have led to disastrous outcomes. Now somewhat rested, Luo Wen didn't feel like stopping. Although the earlier chase seemed perilous, he hadn't been injured. After lingering a bit longer, Luo Wen crawled out of the burrow, intending to continue exploring. As he followed the river downstream, the forest gradually became sparser. He had scouted this area days ago and had traced the source of the vibrations he had sensed earlier. Thanks to multiple rounds of genetic integration, his field of vision was now comparable to his human days. Moreover, his close-range clarity had improved significantly. Thus, Luo Wen spotted the massive creature from afar. It was a colossal beast, and there was no exaggeration in calling it such. It resembled a diplodocus from Earth, with a body length exceeding 30 meters, a shoulder height of 7 to 8 meters, a tiny head, and robust limbs. While its body was enormous, its neck stretched 7 to 8 meters, and its tail extended about 15 meters. Its main torso wasn't that large, but even so, its estimated weight exceeded 10 tons. Each step it took reverberated like thunder. Judging by its simple head and uniform teeth, it was undoubtedly a herbivore. This was confirmed after Luo Wen observed it for a long time. Aside from munching on leaves, it displayed no predatory behavior. That made sense. With its size and structure, it was no sprinter. Its long neck would make catching even a tail-lard rat a struggle. Luo Wen suspected the sparse vegetation in the area was likely the result of its voracious appetite. Although it was the largest creature Luo Wen had encountered, it posed no threat to him. Knowing the source of the vibrations had greatly boosted his sense of security and even helped him sleep better. After all, the unknown was always the most frightening. Despite its harmlessness, Luo Wen didn't approach it recklessly. The food source was simply too large. He couldn't possibly consume it all before it began to rot. For now, it was better to leave it be. The creature wasn't likely to stray far with abundant food nearby. After circling the forest edge and finding nothing new, Luo Wen decided to return to the base. Since gaining remote control via the swarm network, he hadn't visited the base in some time. Over this period, especially after the Type 3 queen ant entered production, the swarm had experienced explosive growth. They now controlled nearly half of the big-headed ant's nest. It wouldn't be long before they wiped out the big-headed ants entirely and took full control of the area. However, the swarm's current force composition was imbalanced. Besides worker ants, there were only assassin-type spy ants, with a glaring lack of frontline soldiers. Previous head-on strategies were no longer viable in the current situation. The tracking systems of the ant-based bugs were also outdated. Against fast-moving targets like tail-lard rats or small dinosaurs, they were at a clear disadvantage, not to mention the all-aerial flying bugs and various bird species. The swarm urgently needed new unit types to establish an integrated air-ground cooperative combat system. Yet, with resources and production capacity still catching up, Luo Wen had time to deliberate on unit combinations. As he contemplated this on his way back, his sharp eyes caught an unusual movement above and to the side. Snapping out of his thoughts, Luo Wen focused on the sight. On a thick branch just beneath the canopy, a leopard-like creature crouched in an attack stance. The creature measured about 2 meters long, slightly larger than a tail-lard rat. Its body was well proportioned, with muscular limbs that exuded agility. Its yellow fur was adorned with black ring patterns, and it had a small head, a long tail, and razor-sharp claws. Its target wasn't Luo Wen, whose optical camouflage was now practically a passive skill, continuously active. Despite his mishap with the flying bugs, the system still proved invaluable in fooling most visually oriented predators. A quick glance to the side revealed the leopard's target, a bird-like creature about 30 centimeters in length. The bird's plumage was vibrant, and Luo Wen knew from experience it tasted great. He had eaten plenty before. The thought made him slightly hungry. That massive diplodocus was beyond his capacity, but the leopard should be manageable, and it came with the bonus of fresh genetic material. The leopard must have been new to the area. Its sudden appearance meant the local birds, accustomed to a predator-free life, were somewhat naive. After several moments of patient stalking, the leopard finally found the perfect position. It pounced, pinning the preening bird. Just as it lowered its head to enjoy its prize, an opportunist approached silently. The leopard, with its assassin-like nature, was highly vigilant. Hearing a faint noise, it froze, twitching its ears. The movement was obvious to Luo Wen, whose high refresh rate vision captured it instantly. He stopped in his tracks, stabilizing his optical camouflage. The leopard scanned its surroundings for a long time but found nothing. Pretending to yawn, it remained tense, its sharp gaze combing the area. Luo Wen couldn't help but admire its cleverness, though its performance was too deliberate. If it were in a talent show, it wouldn't make it past the preliminaries. After a while, failing to detect anything amiss, the leopard finally let its guard down. It lowered its head again, just as its jaws opened wide. Suddenly, a gust of wind howled. The leopard reacted too late, feeling a heavy weight slam onto its back and a sharp pain at its neck. Though the leopard's body was several times larger than Luo Wen's, it was lean and lighter in weight. Pinned by the sudden weight and increasing pain at its neck, the leopard struggled fiercely, growling threateningly. However, it was perched 20 meters high in the canopy. Though the branch was thick, it lacked space for a full-blown fight. With a series of pitiful cries, the leopard tumbled from the branch, Luo Wen clinging to its back. Mid-fall, it cunningly twisted to ensure its back landed first, attempting to use Luo Wen as a cushion. But Luo Wen, a self-proclaimed quadrupedal amphibious soldier, planted his legs firmly on the leopard's back and propelled himself away. In that split second, he even used a limb to snatch the bird from the leopard's claws. The two separated as they fell. Luo Wen's wing covers snapped open, membranous wings unfurling to stabilize his descent. The leopard, however, was merely a tree-climbing terrestrial predator. It hit the ground hard, looking up at Luo Wen in shock. C-113. Developing new frontline units. The fall from such a height wasn't fatal for the leopard, but Luo Wen's venom certainly was. After hitting the ground, the leopard struggled to get up and flee, but the pain in the back of its neck intensified. Its muscle tissues dissolved, its nervous system broke down, and its body lost control, leaving it to collapse helplessly on its side, howling in agony. To avoid attracting other competitors, Luo Wen didn't let it suffer long. He dove down from above, pincers outstretched, silencing the leopard forever. It took a great deal of effort and time, but Luo Wen finally consumed both the leopard and the bird, bringing their fatal rivalry to an ironic resolution in his stomach. Satisfied and full, Luo Wen temporarily lost interest in further excitement. The rest of his journey back to the base was uneventful, and he arrived without issue. Back at the base, the number of fully developed insects had surpassed 1 million. However, there were nearly 10 million eggs and larvae still maturing. This was because the second batch of 50 Type 3 queen ants had matured late, and their first batch of offspring wasn't yet fully developed. It would take a few more days. But Luo Wen's primary purpose in returning wasn't the offspring but the queen ants themselves. Although these weren't the command-specialized Type 1 queens, their intelligence was still slightly higher than that of ordinary bugs. They could help Luo Wen test additional functions of the swarm network. Since the swarm network had been established, Luo Wen noticed a significant rise in the insects' intelligence, especially among the queen ants. This was likely because communication within the swarm network resembled telepathic exchanges. Things that were previously impossible to explain were now understood with minimal effort. Perhaps this was the essence of comprehension beyond words. Within Luo Wen's mental space, the number of nodes had increased by hundreds or thousands of times compared to before. Suddenly, one of the nodes began to flash brightly. Luo Wen focused his thoughts, linking to the node. His consciousness descended, and a quick glance confirmed it was the perspective of a queen ant he had previously tested. Several tests followed, switching between different queen ants without any errors. The accuracy of node connections was 100%. The swarm network truly lived up to its reputation as an interactive system. Apart from the lack of a ringtone, it was almost like a video call. Luo Wen also discovered an important piece of information. Queen ants did not naturally gain command over other insects. Since the Type 3 queens were mainly tasked with production and because the insect population was still relatively small with only one base, Luo Wen himself handled most of the command tasks. If this had been a Type 1 queen, the issue might have been noticed earlier. However, this didn't mean the queen ants couldn't lead. They simply required Luo Wen's authorization. Through the swarm network, Luo Wen could establish various hierarchical levels, each granting different degrees of authority. In a given area, higher-ranking insects could command those of lower rank. They could even issue orders directly through the swarm network. This was far more efficient than the pheromone-based command system previously used by the queens. It also acted as a unique friend or foe identification system. Luo Wen surmised this was an upgraded version of the brood nest's original identification system. It ensured that no other organisms could infiltrate or exploit the swarm. Still, Luo Wen wasn't planning to abandon other identification methods. The swarm network needed external safeguards as well. Perhaps, someday, overconfident infiltrators would think they had bypassed the swarm's defenses, oblivious that every insect around them had already identified them. That thought alone was amusing. Although it seemed like Luo Wen was overthinking or outsmarting the heir, who could predict the future? With his lifespan no longer limited, there were countless days ahead. For now, Luo Wen granted the Type 3 queen ants a basic level of authority, just slightly higher than ordinary bugs. While the swarm network's hierarchical system could support more complex management structures, this feature was overly advanced for the current state of the swarm. The queens, mass-produced on an assembly line, were closer to intelligent ice without subjective consciousness. For now, one level of hierarchy sufficed. This restored the familiar command system of the swarm but equipped every insect with a phone. Simultaneously, Luo Wen took the opportunity to reevaluate the swarm's military composition. In the past, the swarm consisted of two-dimensional units, with soldiers measuring only 20 to 30 centimeters being considered ultrasized. But now, the creatures he encountered often measured over a meter, with some, like the 30-meter-long Diplodocus, being colossal. Slow-moving, outdated soldier ants were no longer suitable for the swarm's development. If the swarm could return to its pre-hibernation scale, it would dominate easily, unless these terrestrial creatures learned to fly, swim indefinitely, and never return to land. Otherwise, they would all become food. Back then, even strong enemies, like the Yellow Earth Ant Legion, were exceptional, with millions in number being a big deal. But now, big-headed ants were at the bottom of the food chain. Birds, long-faced beasts, and tail-lard rats, all seemingly weak creatures, included big-headed ants in their diets. Relying solely on the ant template to conquer the world was now exponentially more difficult. Moreover, Luo Wen had already beaten the game, using the ant template once. Repeating the same strategy would be uninteresting. Luo Wen's ambitions weren't grand. Years of solitude had left him with little beyond survival and the pursuit of distractions to stave off mental collapse. The conclusion was clear. Luo Wen needed to upgrade the swarm's military units to better adapt to the current environment. During his unknown duration of hibernation, his abilities had reached an incredibly advanced level. The ability to choose genetic evolutions was just the foundation. He could now assimilate genes from not only insects but also amphibians, reptiles, and mammals. As long as there were no fundamental conflicts, he could combine them freely. Additionally, Luo Wen could even collect genetic material from plants and fungi. While animal and plant genes were difficult to integrate, he had no such issues combining plant and fungal genes. This meant that, with enough time and experimentation, he could enhance the crops within the ant nest to improve their yield and adaptability. For instance, he could make them more productive or better suited to various environments. C-114. The new main combat species, 1. The matter of crop improvement wasn't a high priority and could be left for later when there was more free time to study it leisurely. With the swarm steadily expanding in size, it was about to step into the limelight and face various challenges. Luo Wen's urgent task now was to determine the primary combat species for the upcoming period. But the question remained, what kind of biological template should be chosen? Continuing to use the ant template wasn't impossible. Adding an advanced detection system, equipping it with a powerful heart, overhauling its nutrient supply system, and enhancing its mobility were all feasible modifications. However, there was one critical, unsolvable problem. The exoskeleton armor. The exoskeleton not only made ants into powerhouses but also improved their defensive capabilities. Yet, the exoskeleton was both a blessing and a curse. Despite its numerous advantages, the exoskeleton inherently restricted the size of the ants. If they wanted to grow larger, they had to go through repeated molting. Take their colossal variant, the ultra-giant soldier ant, for example. To reach its full size, it had to molt twice, this for a body size of merely 20 to 30 centimeters. Luo Wen himself couldn't even recall how many pupations and molts he had undergone to grow to a body length of 60 centimeters. Molting was an energy-intensive and risky process. The solution was straightforward. Extend their larval phase. By directly modifying their genes to allow the larva to grow to the desired size before a single final molding, the need for repeated molting could be eliminated. However, growing a larva to over half a meter in length would consume an enormous amount of time and resources. Larva had no productive capabilities, poor combat ability, and even required worker ants to assist in feeding them. Maybe the swarm could afford such larvae in the future, but with its current scale, it couldn't support even a few. And the swarm thrived on numbers. What use were just a handful of large soldier ants? Other templates, such as small dinosaur-like creatures, tail-lard rats, or long-faced beasts, didn't face the exoskeleton's size limitation, but their combat effectiveness didn't justify their resource consumption. The leopard template. That was feasible, but the swarm didn't have the resources to rear more than a few. What Luo Wen needed was a combat species that was both powerful and cost-effective. After much deliberation, he thought of the transport bug. These creatures, modeled after cliff spiders, were initially created as auxiliary units due to their speed and impressive load-carrying capabilities. However, they also boasted considerable combat power, having earned accolades in numerous battles. Their piercing attacks were like reapers for smaller combat units. Their multi-jointed legs allowed them to traverse obstacles effortlessly, with remarkable gripping ability that enabled them to scale sheer, glass-like rock faces with ease. This made them well suited to most harsh battlefield environments. Although they also had exoskeletons and required one molt during their growth, Luo Wen could genetically modify them to remove the exoskeleton on their main body, retaining it only on their legs. This wouldn't leave their bodies defenseless, as Luo Wen planned to incorporate genes for tough skin and steel-like fur to bolster their protection. Moreover, they rarely fought alone. During hunts, numerous companions would provide mutual support, so the slight loss in defense shouldn't pose a significant issue. This modification freed their bodies from the limitations of the exoskeleton. With the weight reduction from the absent main body armor, they would become even more agile. As their body size increased, only the leg exoskeletons would need periodic replacements, significantly reducing energy consumption and associated risks. Luo Wen also planned to add a small venom gland at the tip of each leg, hiding a stinger for enhanced attack power. This upgrade would not diminish their combat capabilities, instead, it would greatly improve them. Additionally, he would incorporate an echolocation system into them. This would allow these new spider combat bugs to locate enemies more swiftly and accurately in jungle environments, better showcasing their potential. He also intended to modify their dietary systems, shifting them from carnivorous to omnivorous. This had been an idea Luo Wen had entertained for a long time, but he hadn't had the ability to implement it until now. Furthermore, they would be equipped with hibernation and tail-lard genes. In Luo Wen's vision, these new spider combat bugs would be about 30 centimeters in size. A small portion would remain active, subsisting on an omnivorous diet to meet daily needs and maintain the swarm's vigilance. The majority, however, would either feed on dirt or enter hibernation until war broke out. Only during high-intensity conflicts would they be supplemented with meat for energy consumption. The tail-lard gene would allow them to carry additional supplies under certain circumstances, fulfilling special wartime needs. Initially, Luo Wen had considered adding an optical stealth system to them, but upon further investigation, he found the cost to be exorbitantly high. The system essentially added a special nanostructure to the surface of the organism, effectively transforming their entire bodies. The energy consumption was staggering. After some thought, Luo Wen decided that since the spider combat bugs would be the primary combat species for the foreseeable future and would mainly engage in group battles, stealth wasn't particularly necessary. In the end, Luo Wen drafted a template for Spider Combat Bug, modified, which included the optical stealth system for limited production as a special operations unit. With the primary combat species established, he turned to the auxiliary species. The ultra-giant soldier ants, based on the ant template, would still need to be produced. Their size could even be increased to a range of half a meter to a full meter. Given the spider combat bug's defensive limitations, they would need heavily armored infantry to hold the line in direct confrontations. With the ground forces mostly sorted, the next focus was the air force. This was a completely new venture for the swarm, one with no prior experience. Fortunately, Luo Wen had gained ample insight recently, giving him a rough idea of what to do. Currently, there were 3 candidate templates for the Air Force: flying insect genes, flying beetle genes, and bird genes. First, flying beetle genes were eliminated. Their body structure made them extremely inefficient at flying. Luo Wen suspected that their evolution of flight wasn't for combat but simply a workaround for their clumsy terrestrial movement. However, their flight mechanism was highly advanced, and Luo Wen believed they would have their moment to shine. Just not now. Next, bird genes were dismissed. It all boiled down to cost effectiveness. While a single 30-centimeter bird could easily take down a flying insect of similar size, the resources needed to produce one bird could create 10 or even dozens of 10-centimeter flying insects. One bird was no match for 10 flying insects. It might fight to the death and kill most of them, but if it were 10 birds versus 100 flying insects, the birds likely wouldn't even have the chance to fight to the death. Although birds had superior flight capabilities and endurance, those weren't currently needed. Besides, Luo Wen had better alternatives in mind for such roles in the future. C-115. The new main combat species, too. The swarm's first batch of aerial units would use the flying insect template, divided into 2 versions, Type 1 and Type 2. Type 1 closely adhered to the original template, with the only significant addition being an echolocation system. Their primary roles on the battlefield included aerial reconnaissance, target acquisition, marking, and interception. With the swarm now equipped with a real-time communication system, it was crucial to fully leverage it to achieve true coordinated combat. Type 2 flying insects, on the other hand, would incorporate some genes from the fart bug. These were slightly larger than Type 1, with their abdominal poison sacs replaced by storage sacs and their tail stingers swapped for small cannon-like appendages capable of firing viscous toxin projectiles. The fart bug, due to its limited mobility and range, was no longer suitable for the current version of the swarm. Type 2 flying insects were designed as their replacements. The role of Type 2 on the battlefield was to provide aerial fire support and precision strikes. Though their attacks targeted single units, their significantly lower production cost compared to fart bugs meant that their numbers could compensate for this limitation. The original fart bugs would also cease production due to their mobility issues, susceptibility to terrain, high cost, and limited firing angles. Additionally, their commander, the Type 1 queen ant, would undergo some modifications. A pair of membranous wings and an optical stealth system would be added to adapt to new combat scenarios. 2 days later, the swarm established its first tree-based sub-base, which was officially inaugurated on a nearby tree trunk. 2 Type 3 queen ants were sent to develop the new base. Given their initial lack of available combat units, some worker ants were dispatched to handle their feeding, nest building, and daily maintenance. The quick establishment of the Air Force base was made possible by Luo Wen's discovery of a new skill: updating the gene libraries of queen ants through direct physical contact. This meant the swarm no longer needed to produce a new batch of queens every time it acquired new genes. However, the drawback was the necessity of physical contact to perform these updates. For now, while the swarm's territory remained small, this wasn't a major issue. But if it expanded to its previous scale, spanning thousands of kilometers with tens of thousands of queen ants, Luo Wen would have little time for anything else. Thus, Luo Wen began experimenting with the swarm network's cloud storage functionality. If he could master its mechanisms, he could potentially update gene libraries remotely via the swarm network in the future. If successful, this would make operations much more convenient. With the base arrangements completed, Luo Wen found himself temporarily idle, prompting a desire to wander outside. Staying in the base all the time was a severe drain on the swarm's resources, given his voracious appetite. Over the next period, Luo Wen roamed the forest, steadily expanding his exploration range. While feeding himself, he wasn't merely aimlessly wandering. Ever since discovering his ability to absorb plant genes, he had started consciously observing unusual plant species. Though he hadn't yet figured out how to harness this ability fully, he was already on the lookout for peculiar flora. The forest, with its incredible biodiversity, offered plenty to discover. Luo Wen found many fascinating examples, such as carnivorous plants. These plants created various traps with their bodies. Some spread open like jaws, others formed pitcher-like structures, and still others utilized sticky secretions. They preyed on insects, while certain larger flower-like species could even capture small animals. Some species digested their prey remarkably quickly. For instance, a certain flower-like plant could completely digest a small animal in just one night. Fungi also became a collection focus for Luo Wen, as the swarm already had extensive experience cultivating them. Despite their strange appearances and diverse environmental requirements, fungi offered significant potential. Some grew directly on tree trunks, others on the ground, underground, or even on rocks, opening Luo Wen's eyes to previously overlooked possibilities. Algae were also within the scope of his collection. As one of the most ancient plant types, their continued survival and prosperity over millennia demonstrated their considerable evolutionary advantages. Beyond plants, Luo Wen encountered many novel creatures. The vast forest was teeming with life, and the number of species was overwhelming. Insects, naturally, were the most abundant. Though relegated to the bottom of the food chain, their sheer numbers ensured their survival. Despite this abundance, most insects had only mundane traits, with only a few possessing abilities that caught Luo Wen's attention. For example, a large golden beetle boasted a highly durable, spike-covered exoskeleton and a long, conical spiraled horn on its head resembling a unicorn. While its practicality was debatable, its striking and imposing appearance made it incredibly cool. Luo Wen decided that once the swarm developed enough for him to delegate manual tasks, he would fashion himself some golden armor as a showpiece. Conversely, some insects were utterly unimpressive, with evolutionarily pointless traits. One insect species, for instance, had elongated, twisted exoskeletal structures that neither provided defense nor attack capability and were extremely unsightly. Initially assuming that such an abstract appearance must indicate some extraordinary ability, Luo Wen's repeated experiments revealed that it had no practical use other than being an eyesore. This challenged Luo Wen's understanding, as he had always considered insects the epitome of functional evolution until encountering this useless species. Besides insects, Luo Wen encountered numerous birds. Their sizes varied greatly, as did their coloration. Some had short, stubby beaks, others long and sharp, and some were both long and robust. Their songs ranged from melodious and soothing, like a crystal clear stream flowing through the soul, to outright obnoxious noise pollution. The latter invariably ended up in Luo Wen's stomach, becoming sustenance for his wanderings. He also encountered various snakes. Smaller ones with vibrant patterns were generally venomous, using heat sensing to hunt prey, rendering optical stealth ineffective. Interestingly, Luo Wen discovered that while using his hibernation ability, his slightly stiffened and less flexible body could evade their heat sensing. Consequently, snake species had become frequent additions to his diet during this period. Some snakes, however, were massive, better described as pythons. Their enormous bodies and thick girths were astonishing. The largest one Luo Wen encountered measured over 20 meters in length, making it the second largest creature he had seen, second only to the Diplodocus. Covered in large, scaled armor, these creatures possessed immense strength, easily snapping tree trunks as thick as barrels. They posed a far greater threat to Luo Wen than the herbivorous Diplodocus. After assessing his own limitations, Luo Wen wisely chose to keep his distance from these formidable serpents. C-116. Real Combat Drills 1. The remaining creatures were primarily beasts and dinosaurs. The situation for beasts was rather awkward, as most of them occupied the middle to lower levels of the food chain. Even the stronger ones, such as leopards, primarily hunted small birds and various rodents. However, one creature deserved special mention, a species resembling wild boars. These creatures were about 2 meters long, stood approximately 90 centimeters tall at the shoulder, and had sturdy limbs, large ears, and a short tail. Their bodies were covered in black fur, with their backs adorned by a row of rigid bristles. Below that were layers of coarse hair, while the fur on their abdomens was relatively soft. Particularly noteworthy were their sharp, robust tusks protruding from both sides of their mouths. Combined with their muscular build, these creatures delivered a formidable charge with incredible destructive power. In addition, they would often roll in mud, coating themselves to enhance their defenses. They typically moved in groups, ranging from a dozen individuals to over 100. While their diet was broad and consisted mainly of plant matter, including branches, fruits, and roots, these wild boars were undeniably dominant within the forest, boasting strength far surpassing that of leopards. As for the other beasts, most were weaklings not worth mentioning. Next were the dinosaurs. Among them were some formidable entities at the top of the forest's food chain. From afar, Luo Wen spotted two dinosaurs, each about 15 meters long, engaged in a fierce battle for reasons unknown. One of the dinosaurs had a dark greenish-black body, resembling the Tyrannosaurus rex from movies. It stood about 6 meters tall, with a massive skull nearly 2 meters long. Its enormous head and unique jaw structure gave it a terrifying bite force, reaching an astounding 10 tons, with up to 20 tons of force at the rear of its mouth. Adding to this were its interlocking, razor-sharp teeth, its most formidable weapon. Its body was densely packed with muscles, its hind legs were extraordinarily thick, and its tail was robust and powerful. However, its disproportionately short and weak forelimbs detracted from its overall ferocious appearance. Even so, this dinosaur likely weighed over 10 tons, possibly even more than a 30-meter-long diplodocus. Additionally, its body was covered with a thick keratinized layer, providing excellent defense. Its scars and bite marks indicated extensive combat experience. Its opponent was a dinosaur with a crimson body, adorned with black ring-shaped markings. It was slightly larger than the Tyrannosaurus rex but appeared leaner. Its head was relatively long and narrow, suggesting that its bite force might be inferior to the rex's. However, this crimson-striped dinosaur was more agile. While it also stood on 2 legs, its forelimbs were much more developed than the rex's, ending in sharp claws that provided significant offensive capabilities. In summary, the Tyrannosaurus rex was stocky and powerful, relying mainly on its teeth and tail as weapons. In contrast, the crimson-striped dinosaur was agile and flexible, boasting an additional weapon in its claws. The two dinosaurs fought back and forth, evenly matched. Luo Wen, who had approached stealthily, initially thought he could take advantage of the situation. However, to his dismay, the two behemoths, seemingly fighting fiercely, were merely sparring. After inflicting minor injuries on each other, they amicably parted ways, leaving Luo Wen empty-handed in his attempt to scavenge. The roars of these two titans echoed through the forest, demonstrating their immense power. However, despite their loud voices, they attracted few onlookers, a fact that made Luo Wen, an outsider, realize that these two were likely the apex predators of this forest. Sharing the same territory, these two would undoubtedly become obstacles to the swarm's development in the future. Yet Luo Wen wasn't overly concerned. Judging by their massive size, their food consumption must be astonishing. Perhaps, within 100 kilometers, there were only 3 or 4 such creatures. Against such immensely powerful but numerically inferior entities, the swarm had plenty of methods to turn them into nourishment. After wandering outside for some time, Luo Wen returned to find that the base had thoroughly taken over the big-headed ant's nest. However, the fungi produced by the nest weren't enough to sustain the swarm's continued growth. Fortunately, the first batch of 100 modified spider combat bugs had fully matured and reached combat readiness. 2 days later, after Luo Wen returned to the base and rested for a night, the swarm launched its first large-scale hunting operation in the forest. The expeditionary force consisted of 100 modified spider combat bugs, 20 Type 1 flying bugs, and 50 Type 2 flying bugs. The total force of fewer than 200 made this operation seem rather modest. But Luo Wen knew this was a brand new combat experience. If the new operational system succeeded, the swarm's expansion would face no bottlenecks in the near future, growing exponentially. Luo Wen personally commanded this operation, with all the queen ants observing and learning through the swarm network. A buzzing sound rose as 70 flying bugs took off from the airbase, joining the ground-based spider combat bugs as they advanced into the forest. 20 Type 1 flying bugs split from the main group, scattering forward in a dispersed formation. Using ultrasonic waves generated by their vibrating wings, they formed an invisible sonar net, vividly mapping everything within its coverage. As the net pushed forward, the expeditionary force discovered their prey. It was a group of small dinosaur-like creatures, numbering about a dozen. These creatures resembled birds more than traditional dinosaurs. Averaging over a meter in length, they had conspicuous red crests on their heads, long necks, short tails, and bodies covered with fine feathers. Their 2 forelimbs, sparsely adorned with feathers, appeared more decorative than functional. At the moment, They remained oblivious to the impending danger, gathered in small groups as they scratched the soil with their hind claws, searching for insect larvae buried beneath. Guided by aerial reconnaissance, the spider combat bugs swiftly positioned themselves. Within seconds, the small bird-like dinosaurs were simultaneously ambushed. The sky was a blind spot for these bird-like dinosaurs. Although they reacted quickly as the 30-centimeter-long spiders descended upon them, it was already too late. The spider combat bugs used the hooks and adhesive hairs on their legs to latch firmly onto the bird-like dinosaurs' backs. The seemingly defenseless creatures displayed unexpected tenacity. They twisted their long necks into impossible angles, using their sharp beaks to launch counterattacks at the spiders clinging to their backs. However, the spider combat bugs were not there to wrestle. Their multi-jointed legs allowed them to maneuver deftly across the dinosaurs' narrow backs, evading the beaks' strikes. At the same time, they revealed their true weapon. C-117. Real combat drills, 2. The stingers hidden within the hooks of the modified spider combat bugs had silently injected venom into the small bird-like dinosaurs during their brief contact. This venom was not the same as Luo Wen's own toxin. Its primary component was an extremely concentrated digestive fluid. Since the spider combat bugs stored their venom in small glands within their legs, the limited space meant these glands held only small amounts. Naturally, the venom capacity was insufficient for Luo Wen's standard digestive toxin, which required large quantities to be effective. This toxin wasn't purely a poison, it primarily served to digest food externally. Paralyzing and killing prey was merely a secondary effect. Thus, small doses of Luo Wen's toxin only caused intense pain without delivering fatal results. As the prey's size increased, its effectiveness further diminished. Given these limitations, the spider combat bugs couldn't rely on such a toxin. Instead, Luo Wen had combined the genetic traits of various venomous organisms, snakes, spiders, insects, and even a type of snail, to create a new, potent toxin. This innovative venom acted as a powerful anesthetic while being highly lethal. Its mechanism was simple and effective. Once injected into prey, it immediately blocked the transmission of nerve signals. The prey's heart would stop beating, and its breathing would cease shortly after. The time required for the process varied depending on the prey's size and the amount of venom injected. For the small bird-like dinosaurs, it would take no more than 2 or 3 minutes. Once the venom was injected, the spider combat bugs avoided prolonged confrontation. After evading a sharp beak attack, they used their 8 legs to push off forcefully, leaping backward to disengage from the bird-like dinosaurs. One of the dinosaurs, enraged at the audacity of these 30-centimeter-long bugs, was about to pursue when its body suddenly went numb. Simultaneously, a concentrated barrage rained down from above, halting its advance. The small projectile struck its body, causing a searing pain akin to being burned. The dinosaur felt its body grow increasingly numb and unresponsive as the pain subsided. The other bird-like dinosaurs suffered a similar fate. Most were paralyzed on the spot, becoming helpless prey. A few, however, chose to flee rather than counterattack after being struck. Their escape was short-lived. The Type 2 flying bugs intercepted them with precision, ensuring they lost control of their bodies within moments. The battle had barely begun, and in just a few minutes, it was already over. Perhaps the opponents were simply too weak. The swarm's combat forces had barely demonstrated the effectiveness of their coordinated air-ground tactics before the enemy fell. In fact, only about a dozen spider combat bugs had participated in the fight, while the rest merely observed. Luo Wen felt somewhat unsatisfied. The battle had ended before he could fully engage. It was like preparing for a game, warming up with stretches and finger exercises, only for the opposing player to quit immediately after the game started. No sense of fulfillment. Still, he was thrilled by the swarm's initial victory, which validated his current strategy. However, upon examining the prey, Luo Wen felt a bit frustrated. Though these bird-like dinosaurs were only about a meter long, their lack of tails meant their bodies contained a considerable amount of meat. By Luo Wen's estimation, each one weighed around 50 kilograms. The problem was that in developing the combat units, he had completely neglected the logistics units. The modified spider combat bugs, though originally capable of transport as earlier versions, required assistance from other insects to do so. They lacked the limbs necessary for efficient loading and unloading. The flying bugs, as aerial units, prioritized shedding any unnecessary limbs, making them unsuitable for transportation. If the new version of soldier ants were available, they could have temporarily served as laborers. However, their production was far down the sequence, with not even a single egg laid yet. With no time to rectify this oversight, the task of moving the prey fell to Luo Wen himself. His clawed limbs were well suited for gripping, and his exoskeletal armor endowed him with immense strength. After a long day of hard labor, he finally managed to transport all the prey back to the base. For the time being, they were buried in a pile of decaying leaves near the base. The burrower ants were assigned to work overtime, constructing a massive storage chamber. Leaving the prey exposed outside was too risky. Meanwhile, an order was placed for the first batch of 10 heavy armored soldier ants, each a meter long. These would require several dozen days to mature, undergoing a pupal stage for their final development. Once ready, the heavy armored soldier ants could temporarily serve as transport workers. Until then, Luo Wen would have to handle the job himself. Fortunately, this hunt yielded substantial gains. The few hundred kilograms of food would sustain the swarm for a while, assuming Luo Wen didn't consume it himself or venture out to find his own food. The combat units were ordered to retreat. With sufficient food on hand, continuing the hunt would only result in unnecessary killing and waste. A small contingent was assigned to maintain vigilance and patrol the area, while the rest entered temporary hibernation. Luo Wen, meanwhile, didn't linger at the base, heading out alone to forage. In this forest, Luo Wen's ability to obscure his presence, including his scent, pheromones, and heat signature, meant that only a few apex predators posed any threat. Moreover, with his superior detection abilities, even those few titans were no match if Luo Wen chose not to provoke them. As a result, Luo Wen now occupied a position at the top of the food chain in the forest. Hunting alone posed little danger, and he enjoyed a comfortable life, eating whatever he pleased. However, barely 2 days into his escapades, an urgent call came from the base. 2 queen ant nodes began flashing. Luo Wen, perched on a tree branch, immediately locked onto the signal and projected his consciousness. The mental exchange was swift, and Luo Wen quickly grasped the situation. The prey, stored outside temporarily while the storage chamber was under construction, had attracted trouble. Covered in decaying leaves and killed without visible wounds, the prey initially seemed secure. Yet, with the recent surge in larval production at the base, the underground plantation could no longer meet their needs. The queen ants had naturally dispatched worker ants to cut pieces from the prey to supplement the base's resources. While the worker ants made only small incisions, their sheer numbers gradually expanded the wounds. Inevitably, the scent of blood began to spread. C-118. Storage issues 1. The stench of blood had drawn some keen-scented predators toward the swarm's base. They lurked, observed, and edged closer. But as soon as they crossed a certain perimeter, they were detected by the Type 1 flying bugs patrolling the skies. These bugs immediately relayed the situation through the swarm network to 2 queen ants stationed in nearby sub-bases. The queen ants, having received prior authorization to access the vision of lower-ranking insects, assessed the situation. However, unsure of how to proceed, they promptly escalated the matter to Luo Wen. The entire process happened swiftly. In fact, from the detection of the intruders to Luo Wen receiving the alert, less than 30 seconds had passed. Some of the cautious predators hadn't even moved from their positions. Switching to the perspective of an airborne Type 1 flying bug, Luo Wen observed the intruders. He quickly realized their caution stemmed from weakness. Though the creatures were varied in type, they shared a common trait: small size. The largest among them measured barely over 2 meters in length. Most were beasts with sturdy limbs, whether bipedal or quadrupedal, optimized for running. Their offensive and defensive capabilities were unimpressive. Based on Luo Wen's observations of the local ecosystem, most of these creatures were scavengers, feeding on plant and animal remains, nature's cleanup crew. Among them were tail-lard rats, which lacked the strength to hunt but eagerly sought leftovers, and smaller dinosaur-like creatures that occasionally hunted but didn't mind scraps. After scanning the group, Luo Wen concluded that none of them posed a serious threat. He returned the handling authority to the queen ants, instructing them to properly welcome the visitors. Since they had come all this way, they might as well stay for a while. The queen ants had proven adept at learning and mimicking. Although Luo Wen's last commanded battle had ended quickly, dozens of queen ants had been observing and exchanging insights. This situation presented a perfect opportunity to hone their skills against weaker opponents. It would also help train future queen ants, sparing Luo Wen from having to personally demonstrate every time. It was akin to learning to drive. Earlier learners would teach the newcomers. Returning his consciousness to his body, Luo Wen set off toward the base. While the battle itself didn't require his intervention, the subsequent task of transporting the spoils was his responsibility. By the time Luo Wen reached the base, the battle had been over for quite some time. Corpses of various animals lay scattered around the perimeter. This was despite the swarm's limited manpower, which prevented them from attacking all at once, scaring off many of the intruders. Even so, the resulting hull weighed over 2 tons. Luo Wen spent an entire day transporting it back to the base. During this period, 2 more waves of food delivery arrived. One group consisted of dog-like creatures with mottled black, white, and yellow fur that lacked any aesthetic appeal. Though small in stature, about a dozen of them arrived as a pack. They were muscular, fast, and had impressive stamina. Unfortunately for them, none of these traits mattered against the swarm's new venom. Interestingly, these mottled dogs had a unique jaw structure, boasting the strongest bite force Luo Wen had seen among beasts. Even leopards, slightly larger in size, paled in comparison. The leopards, however, excelled in short bursts of speed but lacked the endurance of these canines. Moreover, leopards were solitary hunters, though their tree-climbing ability allowed them to catch birds. Without this skill, they might not even compete with the dogs on land. Both species had genetic traits that complemented each other, offering potential as templates for creating a new combat organism. The base's surroundings were dotted with mounds of earth. Without large excavation units, construction of underground storage facilities progressed slowly. At this rate, it would be some time before the storage chambers were completed. Meanwhile, the accumulating prey presented a logistical headache. The current wave consisted mostly of small-time scavengers, but who could say when one of the area's apex predators might show up? The amassed food alone was enough to lure those top-tier creatures. Should he produce more burrower ants to speed up excavation? Yet burrower ants required a lengthy growth period, taking at least several dozen days to mature. Too many variables could arise in that time. Nonetheless, Luo Wen reluctantly placed an order for a few burrower ants, which would likely be completed alongside the heavy armored soldier ants. Even so, Luo Wen felt dissatisfied. This approach merely treated the symptoms, not the root cause. The current genetic reserves were no longer as scarce as they once were. With so many new genetic fragments recently collected and his capabilities enhanced severalfold, surely a better solution existed. He calmed himself and began recalling all the creatures he had encountered, analyzing which abilities might prove useful. The crux of the issue was the swarm's small size. Back when the swarm spanned 10 kilometers, they had managed to dispose of mountains of insect carcasses in no time. Of course, back then, no other creatures dared to covet the swarm's spoils. Reflecting on the past held little value. Luo Wen first considered the saliva preservation method used by worker ants, who had once mixed their saliva with formic acid to coat and preserve food. Though still effective, this method faced the same limitation: the swarm's small scale. Millions of worker ants were insufficient to process over 2 tons of food quickly. Moreover, their processing methods inevitably released a lot of scent, compromising safety. Luo Wen then contemplated other animal food storage methods. However, most creatures operated on a meal-to-meal basis, leaving them free of his current worries. Others, like tail-lard rats, had evolved specialized organs to store food internally. Yet such strategies held little relevance for this situation. Suddenly, Luo Wen thought of web-building spiders. Some spiders wrapped their prey in silk for preservation, periodically injecting venom to keep them subdued but alive. Luo Wen glanced at the already dead prey. This method was clearly impractical. Perhaps it could be tested in the future, but for now, none of the swarm's insects possessed silk-producing glands. Another spider type injected digestive enzymes into prey, turning their bodies into natural containers. Luo Wen had used this approach when processing the long-faced beast, but the dissolved muscle tissue required immediate consumption to prevent rapid decay. C-119. Storage Solutions 2. Furthermore, this method also emitted odors. Back then, every time Luo Wen held a private feast, he would use the Gatling gun to sanitize the surrounding area. Most critically, only Luo Wen currently possessed the ability to produce compressed digestive enzyme toxins within the swarm. The older version of transport bugs once had this capability, but after being upgraded into modified spider combat bugs, their venom was replaced with neurotoxins. Luo Wen's toxin gland was small, with limited reserves, making it impossible for him to take on this task, even if he did nothing else. But thinking about digestive fluids opened Luo Wen's mind to new possibilities. He recalled encountering carnivorous plants before. What if he could create a plant capable of quickly digesting prey while also being edible for the swarm? Such a solution would instantly resolve the problem. With this idea in mind, Luo Wen immediately set to work. Although he had a concept, extensive experimentation was necessary to make it a reality. Luo Wen had no prior experience manipulating plant genetics, so everything had to be explored from scratch. He began by combining the traits of several carnivorous plants to create prototypes, which he then instructed the brood nest to produce. The brood nest, powerful as always, generated seeds that even came with their own nutrient packs, sufficient to support the seeds during their initial growth phase. Finding a small patch of land near the base, Luo Wen planted the seeds. He had no idea how long they would take to sprout and could only wait patiently. In the days that followed, Luo Wen, engrossed with his new toys, lost interest in venturing out. Moreover, every day brought new scavengers trying their luck at the base, effectively delivering themselves to the swarm. The swarm now had an overabundance of food, so much that Luo Wen had to help consume some of it to avoid spoilage. He also took on the daily tasks of transporting, burying, cutting, cleaning up, and even sanitizing and deodorizing the leftovers. Time passed, and Luo Wen continued experimenting with new seed prototypes every day. The earliest batch of seeds had long since sprouted. Though they grew at varying speeds and exhibited the ability to digest prey, none met Luo Wen's expectations. The main issue was that the plants were not palatable. They focused solely on their own growth, without considering taste or nutritional value. Luo Wen speculated that his experimental approach might be flawed and decided to incorporate genes from edible plants. The first candidate he thought of was the white fungal crop grown in the underground farms. Rich in protein and with a sweet flavor, this fungus was one of Luo Wen's favorite foods. Unfortunately, the high-yield and tasty mushroom had long since been lost, with no seeds left. However, Luo Wen had recently gathered various mushroom samples from the forest. Many of these were toxic, but such poisons had little effect on Luo Wen, who would quickly evolve antibodies. What Luo Wen possessed, the swarm also possessed. Adding various fungal genes to the new seeds led to more diverse combinations. Taking it a step further, Luo Wen incorporated genes from various algae species. Eventually, the genetic complexity of these seeds surpassed that of many animals. Batch after batch of crops sprouted. Luo Wen carefully analyzed their traits, retaining beneficial qualities and discarding flaws, then used the insights to create new seed prototypes. The heavy armored soldier ants and scorpions had both been successfully produced a few days earlier. The heavy armored soldier ants, with a body length of 1 meter, nearly double Luo Wen's size, boasted extremely thick exoskeleton armor from a single cast molding process. Their robust and imposing appearance was undeniably striking. Their arrival relieved Luo Wen of his transportation duties. Tasks like cutting were no longer his responsibility, giving him more time to refine the seeds. As time passed, fewer and fewer invaders dared to approach the base. The steady disappearance of small predators in the area had turned it into an unspoken forbidden zone. Luo Wen even went so far as to deliberately spread the scent of blood, but the arrivals were sparse. During this time, the swarm thrived thanks to an ample food supply, steadily increasing in numbers. Between his experiments with plant genetics, Luo Wen also developed several new specialized soldier types designed to counter the apex predators of the area. Thus, when Luo Wen bled the prey to lure predators, he wasn't afraid of drawing these top-tier creatures. Fortunately, the swarm had stockpiled plenty of food, and hunting parties, now led by newly produced Type 1 queen ants, regularly ventured out to hunt. Freed from food-related duties, Luo Wen continued to immerse himself in the study of plant genetics. Watching seeds born from various genetic combinations take root, sprout, and exhibit unique traits felt like an addictive game of lottery to Luo Wen. As the swarm's hunting range expanded, their food consumption increased. This eventually drew the attention of the area's apex predators. These top-tier creatures noticed the rise of a new, aggressive, and dominant force that consumed vast amounts of prey daily, putting pressure on their survival. Although Luo Wen had anticipated that apex predators would eventually confront the swarm, he hadn't expected the first visitor to be a giant python. This enormous snake, far thicker than a barrel and over 30 meters long, arrogantly approached the swarm's base. It raised its head high, flicking its forked tongue, its gaze filled with disdain. While Luo Wen had never encountered this particular python, he had seen many around 10 meters long. These massive snakes were covered in dense, smooth scales that provided robust defense and deflected attacks. The venomous stingers of the modified spider combat bugs were ineffective against these scales, unable to penetrate their defenses. Without penetration, even the strongest venom was useless. Luo Wen had long considered these snakes obstacles to the swarm's territorial expansion, using them as hypothetical enemies to develop countermeasures. Recently, specialized weapons designed to combat these pythons had been completed. Luo Wen hadn't yet gone looking for trouble, but the trouble had come to him instead. Though the 30-meter python was unexpected, Luo Wen was confident it would appreciate the gift he had prepared. Several spider combat bugs with visibly swollen abdomens emerged from the base. They differed slightly from standard spider combat bugs, featuring notably slender legs and thin exoskeleton armor that raised them slightly off the ground, giving them a more imposing appearance. These special bugs had an exceptionally long name: Antipython and other large reptile swallowing type biological suicide explosion spiders, or simply, self-destruct spiders. C-120. Toxic explosions and the giant python. Once the self-destruct spiders emerged, they immediately moved past the swarm's ranks, with two heading straight toward the python. As they crawled, they gradually shifted into their running mode. Using their legs like gymnasts launching themselves into the air, they flipped and rolled forward. Their elongated limbs, bent like powerful slingshots, propelled them forward at speeds nearly double that of their usual crawling pace. Upon nearing the python, they leapt high, with their slingshots catapulting them into the air toward the snake's head. The python, in the middle of relishing its dominance, was caught off guard by this apparent act of self-sacrifice. Did these tiny creatures, awed by its majestic form, intend to pay tribute? Was this their way of currying favor? Despite its massive size, the python was incredibly agile. With a swift motion of its head, it precisely caught both self-destruct spiders. Measuring just 30 centimeters in length, the bugs were minuscule compared to the snake's enormous maw and were swallowed whole in one gulp. Sliding down the python's esophagus, the self-destruct spiders reached its stomach. The thin exoskeleton armor covering the self-destruct spiders offered little protection against physical damage. However, it was highly resistant to acid and corrosion, allowing them to survive the gastric acids for an extended period. Not that they needed it. The swollen abdomens of the self-destruct spiders housed not only 5 toxin glands filled with potent mixed toxins but also an almost complete Gatling gun system. Inside, 2 chemical chambers simultaneously injected their stored compounds into a reaction chamber. The chemicals immediately reacted violently. However, the reaction chamber lacked an exhaust outlet. When the internal pressure from the chemical reaction reached a critical point, the abdomen of the self-destruct spider exploded. Deadly heat and a torrent of toxins were released in all directions. Outside, the python, still basking in its triumph, suddenly let out an earth-shattering roar of agony. Its massive body writhed in pain, its abdomen convulsing as it attempted to regurgitate its meal. But the self-destruct spiders had long since detonated into fragments. Even if the snake could empty its stomach, there was nothing left to expel. Inside the python, the intense heat had scorched its stomach, allowing the toxins to infiltrate its system. As the snake thrashed, the toxins spread throughout its body. The paralyzing agents in the toxins momentarily dulled the python's pain, enabling it to clumsily lift itself and make a desperate attempt to flee. At this moment, some previously overlooked Type 1 flying bugs in the sky launched a concentrated assault. A hail of bullets rained down on the python's eyes. Though the attacks initially seemed ineffective, its eyelids closed to block most of the bullets. The projectiles were far more than mere kinetic weapons. They carried potent toxins and a strong adhesive. The bullets stuck to the eyelids instead of bouncing off, and their toxins began corroding the eyelid's surface. As more bullets adhered to its eyelids, the python's defenses were breached. The moment the toxins reached its eyeballs, the snake let out another heart-wrenching scream. No longer bothering to shield itself from the airborne attackers, the python barreled forward, crashing through the forest in a blind panic. Trees too thin to withstand its bulk snapped like twigs, showcasing the python's immense strength. Luo Wen regretted not deploying more self-destruct spiders earlier. If he hadn't been so stingy, the python might already be dead instead of still thrashing around. However, after such prolonged torment, the python was on its last legs. The toxins had spread throughout its body, and as it continued its desperate charge, its movements grew increasingly uncoordinated. In a final burst of effort, The python demolished another small patch of forest before collapsing lifelessly to the ground, its 30-meter-long body sprawled across the earth. The injured python had fled several kilometers from the swarm base before succumbing. Its final resting place lay 4 to 5 kilometers away, a result of its impaired vision causing it to repeatedly crash into trees. Otherwise, it might have made it 10 kilometers or more. Even 4 or 5 kilometers posed a logistical nightmare for Luo Wen. The python's body, weighing nearly 20 tons and heavier than a diplodocus, presented a colossal challenge for transportation. The entire force of heavy armored soldier ants was mobilized. These ants, far stronger than Luo Wen had anticipated, exhibited adaptations to support their massive forms. Their legs had thickened, and paired with their heavy exoskeleton armor and low-set chassis, they resembled miniature moving fortresses. Unfortunately, their limited mobility confined them to tasks like transportation. The heavy armored soldier ants used their enormous mandibles to grip the python's head muscles and began dragging it along. However, the head muscles couldn't bear the python's full weight. The ants frequently stopped to adjust their grip, leaving the python's head mangled within moments. Its scales and muscles were torn open, exposing the bone underneath. The ants hooked their mandibles into the eye sockets, jawbones, and other sturdy areas, finally gaining traction. The python's massive body flattened the ground as it was dragged, leaving a 2-meter-wide bloody trail that stretched for kilometers. The scent of blood wafted for miles. Even so, few predators dared to approach. The python's earlier roars had likely scared off any potential scavengers, much like how weaker creatures had avoided the T-Rex's battle with the black-ringed red dragon. Without interference, the heavy armored soldier ants brazenly dragged the python back to the base. Luo Wen, uninterested in overseeing the dismemberment, retreated to his experimental garden to continue tinkering with plants. Cutting apart such large prey was a task better suited to the heavy armored soldier ants, who were already experienced in such work. The python's body provided a timely solution to the swarm's dwindling resources. The ants cleared a large open area near the base to process the carcass, working in the open without any attempt to hide their activities. With no immediate threats in the vicinity and the successful hunt of the python bolstering their confidence, the swarm no longer saw a need to conceal their prey or bloodshed. Although Luo Wen's fascination with developing new crops now seemed unnecessary, it had become a personal obsession. Even if the current circumstances didn't demand it, he considered it an enjoyable way to pass the time.